Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Spaces with me. My name is Kalu Aja, and we do our money spaces every Saturday. Going to move to Sunday from February, and here we talk about money, the economy, finance, and of course, we make it personal. How does this relate to you on a personal level, your wallet, your household, your budgets? That's really what we're talking about here. We take a topic and we break it down for you in a way that you can understand it, and of course, use that information as the week or as the month or as the year comes by. Today we have, I'm trying to get a guest in here. I hope he joins us pretty quick. We want to talk about the macroeconomic picture in Nigeria. I want to set you guys up for 2023. And we said it's going to be a good idea before we bring in the investment guys that are going to talk about personal investing, where you should invest in 2023. Let's have a broad overview, right, of the Nigerian economy in 2022, and then take a look at where it's going to go to in 2023 as regarding the big numbers, the macroeconomic indicators. So I have my guest today. His name is Kelvin. He's not yet here. I'm expecting him here any minute. And that's really what I want to talk about. What's going on with the Nigerian economy? Is it good? Is it bad? How can we make it better? Of course, it's important that we are approaching an election. Yeah, just next month. The next month is going to be the election, right? So it's very, very important that we are also able to dimension these big numbers we hear. Why is this important to us, and why should we know all this? So we've got Kelvin. I'm going to make him introduce himself. I see you there as a listener, Kelvin. Thanks. You're now a speaker. Kelvin, welcome to the Spaces. If you want to do a quick introduction, then we can just get started. Go ahead, sir.
Carlo, hi, good evening. How are you today?
I am very, very well. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, sir. Yeah. What's up?
Happy New Year to everyone also who is listening to us from wherever you are.
Yeah.
Um, well, my name is Calvin. I am building a business in Nigeria, and I also am interested in macroeconomics and policy.
Hmm.
So I do a little bit of consulting for private and public sector, and yeah, that's it.
That's it. All right. Okay, that's very modest, I'll say. But I get it. We're trying to be modest on a Sunday, on a Saturday. That's good. Great, Kevin. Okay, let's dive right into it, right? I look at macroeconomics as the big picture economic issues, those big things, right? That sort of give us an indication of where the economy is going. For me, macroeconomic indicators are like when I'm driving my car. I see the fuel light comes on, or I see the service now light comes on. It tells me there's something going on. It tells me if the car is performing excellent, or if the car has got issues down the road. So I got like five indicators here I want to talk around. I want to talk about what is it, right? Why does it matter? And of course, what's the number? So just five, so, because most of the guys following might not be economists. Even though everyone is an economist, but not everyone following is trained as an economist. So I want us to break this down so people understand why this is important to us. So I have five topics here we're going to talk about, Kevin. GDP per capita growth, inflation, productivity, oil exports, and the exchange rate. But Kevin, before we even go into this topic, let's start with the fuel crisis in Nigeria right now. Many people listening to us today, believe it or not, are tuning in from a filling station in Nigeria. Kevin, walk us through what is going on in Nigeria as regards to supply of PMS. The PIB has been passed, PIA now. We have new regulators. We have, should we say, higher oil prices. We've allocated monies in the budget in 2023 for subsidy. Kelvin, why don't Nigerians have PMS in their tanks today?
Well, thank you. So, first of all, we have to appreciate the fact that the whole situation in Russia and Ukraine impacted on um, the energy problems that Nigeria has today. And I'll come back to Nigeria because the real drivers of the problem you have are they are homegrown.
Mm.
There are some external factors, but they are mostly
Okay.
homegrown. So, take for example, um, how ways and means affected inflation. It caused devaluation of the naira, and it slowed down the pace of interest on
Mm-hmm.
savings, reduced the time it takes for inflation to double and for the currency to lose 100% of its
Mm.
value. And that affected the whole DSDP
What's
arrangements.
DSDP?
DSDP is direct sales, direct purchase agreement, where NNPC gives some select companies, along with its own subsidiary called Duke Oil. Duke Oil is like a shadow company that is not often stated, but that is owned by NNPC. And post PIA, Duke Oil is not supposed to be in
Okay.
existence, really. So the NNPC gives these companies, along with Duke Oil, petroleum crude oil feedstock. These companies refine crude oil into PMS and other derivatives, but the only one they report to NNPC is
Mm.
PMS. And it's interesting because a lot of people are under this assumption that PMS is the only derivative of crude oil. It's not. You have PMS, we've talked about this, I think over the last 18 months, we've talked about the derivatives of crude oil. You have PMS, you have AGO, you have dual purpose kerosene, you have Jet A1, you have bitumen binders, you have liquefied refinery gas, you have pet coke. Pet coke is what you use in making the aluminum cans. Yeah, aluminum roofs, aluminum cans. That's like all
Oh,
your canned drinks, all your canned drinks. And you notice that the inflation in the price of canned drinks is also caused by the high cost of importing pet coke into Nigeria and converting that pet coke into aluminum
okay.
cans. Yeah, Heineken last year, I think, reviewed their prices on um, um, their beer because of pet coke. That's the cans that are made from aluminum. So you have all these derivatives. They don't report to the NNPC. And then it costs more money because of the fall in the naira to bring in PMS into Nigeria. So basically, their landing price was like 148, I think 145 to 148. And then that's the price at which the members of IPMAN buy from the depots in Lagos and sell. They bring some feedstock into Calabar Seaport. People buy, and now it's gone up. It's gone up. The dealers are saying that members of IPMAN are saying that they're having to buy at between 235 and 240, and the government cannot expect the members to run at a loss because how do you want us to buy PMS from the depot
Mm.
at 235 to 240 and then sell at 180, 185? It doesn't make any sense. So, and this is the argument for the government cannot continue to maintain the subsidy. And it's also because now between 2019 and 2023, and this was something that the immediate past Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachuku, raised, the number of barrels, liters of PMS that Nigeria consumes was increased without any, without providing stakeholders with any data, any empirical data to prove. It was increased from 29 million to 66 million liters. Ibe
So,
Kachuku made it
let me
very
say that
clear.
again, please. How much?
Ibe Kachuku, the immediate past Minister of State for Petroleum, said that between 2019, yeah, and 2023, the number of liters of PMS Nigeria consumes increased from 29 million liters per day to 66 million liters per
Wow.
day. You can't provide any evidence from vehicle licensing office, from road safety, from the people who sell generators, from the filling station owners. You can't provide any evidence from the trucks that haul product from depot to filling station, from filling stations. Basically the distribution structure. You can't provide any evidence or data to back the fact that the number of liters that are consumed doubled and went up above 200% within the space of 4 to 5 years. And this also impacted because the more liters of PMS you're paying for subsidy, the more you see that reflects on the under recovery for petroleum subsidy on the government budget, which for 6 months, ending in June, July, is going to cost the government 30.6 trillion naira. So the bone of contention here is that the government needs to accept. The dealers are saying that they will not sell below 270 naira per liter. NMPC and Ministry of Petroleum is insisting, NMDPRA, NUPRC, they're insisting that they must sell it at 185. And the dealers are saying that, look, if you want us to sell at 185, then give us the product at 150. It's as simple as that.
What's the subsidy in the budget? Should that not cover this 30 naira difference you're talking about? Or is
The problem, Carlo, the problem is that you and I know this, Carlo. The problem is that the government is broke. We don't want to accept it, but the Nigerian government is broke.
okay?
Look, there are two major line items on the budget. You have debt servicing, yeah, sinking fund, 6.5 trillion, which is about 29% of the entire budget. And then you have PMS subsidy at 30.6 trillion naira. This government is actually borrowing money to pay interest on debt and to pay PMS subsidy. And it's in violation of sections 41(1)(a) of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that states clearly that the government can only borrow money to fund either capital expenditure or human development. The government is broke. They don't have money.
So Kevin, what we're saying is that right now the landing cost of PMS is higher than the price that the government has set as a retail price.
The landing cost of PMS is higher than the government has set, but the government has refused to accept because it doesn't want a situation where it will be compelled to remove petroleum subsidy. And this is a political
Yeah.
decision. They're like, if we remove the subsidy now, everywhere is going to go bonkers, and we're definitely going to lose more political
Okay,
capital.
but that's
And I assure you, after the elections, the subsidy will be removed and PMS price will go above 400 naira per liter. I
yeah,
assure
but
you
this is
on
the
that.
point where Nigerians don't get it right. Nigerians today, before the elections, are lining up to buy at the same 400 naira per liter. Right, no one today is buying at 200 or 300 today. It's sold at black market prices today. So Nigerians are asking, why not just make us pay more? Let's at least get the petrol and go home and sleep. We all know what's going to happen. We all know that fuel price is going to increase after the election. So why not just do it now? It's already nobody's a fool anymore, right? Why can't you just do it now and let the economy at least recoup?
They, they don't want to do it because it's going to bleed the ruling party. You're going to lose a lot of political capital going into an election. You can imagine removing petrol subsidy barely 30 days to the elections, and then is it 30 days or 34 days to the elections, and then above 400 naira per
Yeah.
liter. It's a political decision. It's a political decision, but I understand that after the elections, that the government actually plans to remove it,
So
100%
you're
of it.
hearing it, guys. The price is gonna go up. That's not a surprise to anyone that the price should go up. I think the anger for Nigerians, and I'm speaking as a Nigerian, is that we have four refineries minus Dangote, four refineries. We have crude oil in the ground in Nigeria. Okay, there's a cost to get that crude oil out of the ground. But even during the war, they were able to refine this low sulfur crude oil and put in cars and it worked. Why should Nigerians, the average Nigerian guy, why should we pay for the inefficiency of the federal government in not being able to refine crude oil and deliver to Nigeria? This is why Nigerians are angry. I don't think we don't mind paying more for imported goods, but a local commodity simply refined and sell. We can't seem to get that right. It's crazy.
Yeah. So the whole turnaround maintenance thing for as is a scam that is a racket that has been used by successive governments over the last 23 years to give Nigerians
Yeah,
hope. The four refineries cost about 100 billion naira in terms of
yeah,
overhead, and you can imagine that despite spending by 180 million US dollars on a yearly basis, you can't produce anything.
Gotcha.
So at the end of the day, we have to accept that the way to go is to sell the four refineries, strip them down into carcass, sell them, and accept that the government has no business running a refinery.
Well said.
It doesn't have any business running a refinery. Civil servants cannot run a
Well,
refinery. The same way civil servants cannot run a steel plant. The Jakuta steel plant, civil servants cannot run it.
okay. Well said, Kellen. So I mean that point is well taken. I think that point is well taken. Let's go into the indicators, as it were. Let's start with GDP per capita. I always try to explain GDP as output. So if you don't know what GDP is, GDP is just output in the economy. If I had a bakery and I made 100 loaves of bread a day, and each loaf of bread costs say 10 naira. Roughly, you can argue that my GDP is those 100 loaves multiplied by 10, so 1,000, right? So my GDP, my output is 1,000. But what I want us to focus on, Kevin, is the GDP per capita, which means that bakery, I have maybe 100 children. So if you divide 1,000 by 100, you get back the 10 naira. That's a good measure of growth, right? To say how much has my bakery done over 10 years. I simply go back and say how much profit in quote or how much output has my bakery done. Kept the numbers don't look good. Right now, Nigeria's GDP, which if you say the total GDP, right, is less than 3%. Less than 3%. The Nigeria's population growth is at 3%, which means the Nigerian economy is growing slower than the population. Oil GDP is negative. So crude oil and gas sector GDP is negative. GDP per capita or GDP growth below 3%, below the level of growth of the population. GDP per capita, Nigeria is back to where we were in the 1970s, which means that whatever growth we got in 1970s, 1980s, our GDP per capita has fallen to back where we were in those years. Ken, what's going on?
Well, Kalu, it's interesting to note you said this because if you look at the last 7+ years, you see that GDP per capita actually dropped from somewhere around 30,001 to
Wow.
$2,100. You know, and like you said, GDP is growing slower than the population. The fertility rate in Nigeria is about 5.4 babies per woman. The fertility rate in the US is about 1.4 babies per woman. And it doesn't portend well because I think one of the problems the Nigerian government has is a duplication of functions and lack of coordination between MDAs. It's a big problem that you have. For example, if you look at the central bank and the fiscal authorities, monetary policy and fiscal authorities, there is a huge disconnect in terms of policy making and coordination. You can imagine last year that the governor of the central bank made statements and said that he doesn't need to consult the minister of finance in his naira design policy.
Mm.
And we can all see how that has panned out. Today is 21, if I'm not mistaken, and um, like 9 days to the deadline, people are still collecting old notes. All the monies that were sent into the banking system, people are collecting back at the ATMs. The banks, there's a standoff between the central bank and the commercial banks, and it doesn't look like the policy is going to work out. So you see, it's a failure of strategy, and the reason why it's a failure of strategy, I'll tell you two areas I've identified over the last couple of years. Number one has to do with violation of extant rules, especially as it regards the CBN Act, and specifically for sections 38 on ways and means. Number two has to do with the budget office and the coordination between the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, Ministry of Finance, Minister of State for Finance, Budget and National Planning, then the Minister of Finance herself. And the reason I said this is because President Buhari's government has pursued a fiscal strategy paper, its medium-term expenditure framework, that has always focused on deficits, on debt as a means to fund or cover deficits in his
Mm,
budget. Within the last 2 years, for example, within the last 2 years, federal government has collected 13 trillion naira through ways and means from the Central Bank of
mm,
Nigeria. 13 trillion. Now, you look at the limits, you look at the revenues that the government has gotten over the last 8 years. You see that the average has gone between somewhere around 400 and 500 million dollars in cap that represents 5% of real revenues for the previous accounting year. But the government has steadily extended that cap. And if you look at the nominal ratio is basically like what I call the ratio between expected government revenues, yes, and 5% of expected government revenues. You see that that has gone from somewhere around 4% in 2014 when Jonathan was leaving
yeah.
office and steadily gone to somewhere around 140%. So you have a limit that was moved from about 450 to $500 million to $53 billion like you have today. In fact, on the 28th of on the was it on the 28th or 24th of December, 28 either 28th or 22nd of December. That was the last sitting before the Senate went on recess. They went ahead and approved another 819 billion naira in ways and means
These are all
loans to fund a supplementary
yeah, these are
budget
all over
for
for the federal government.
exactly. So now you have a situation where ways and means came in, M1 money supply flooded, CBN Monetary Policy Committee, their strategy for containing inflation ruined because there is practically nothing they can do. Well, I'll blame them because they are the CBN. They are in charge of telling the president that, look, we're an independent institution. There are laws, there's CBN Act. You cannot exceed this limit and you must pay back the previous advances that has, extended into overdrafts and attracting commercial interest
Yeah.
rates. Yeah, it's their work. But then, on the other hand, the monetary policy tools that they have in their kitty to be able to fight it is completely
Mm-hmm.
obliterated. So you have a situation where, on one hand, the government is accelerating the pace of funding because there's just a lazy approach. Look, if you set a budget, you have a deficit. If you cannot um, borrow money from the Eurobonds market or from multilateral or bilateral institutions like maybe the Bank of Japan, sorry, the Japanese government or your lenders in the US or Germany or the World Bank or IMF or AFDB, you go to Ways and Means, you go to the
Yeah.
CBN and you collect the difference. That's what they've
Mm,
done. And, you having this synergy where um, you have accelerating, ways and means overdrafts that has caused inflation and
mm,
devaluation, and that is making it difficult for you to contain inflation, and that is causing your exchange rate to weaken further. And if you look at the fact that between 2019 and 2023, the exchange rate went from 365 to 745, which is what you have it today, you begin to understand how um, exchange rates affects inflation and
but Kevin,
how
if I
the more money, the more money you borrow, the more money you borrow. I'm sorry, the more the naira weakens, and the higher your inflation goes, the more you're trying to have the Monetary Policy Committee raise the MPR to align the interest and inflation yield curve. That takes your bond yield spreads up, and that increases the cost of
Kelvin,
borrowing. And then,
if I may, right, I want everyone to follow what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I want everyone to follow what you're saying in terms of how this borrowing by overdraft from the Central Bank of Nigeria is causing inflation, is causing SMEs to fall, and is now directly impacting the GDP. Like we said at the intro, GDP is less than population growth, 3%. So I'm just trying to nail it down. Why? And this is for, I don't think we've surpassed 3% or 3.5 in 8 years. I don't know if we've surpassed 3.5% since 2015, Kelvin. I'm not sure we have for Nigerian GDP.
No, no,
We
we
haven't.
haven't.
Which means for 8 years, what it means that for 8 years, the population of Nigeria has grown faster than the economic growth of Nigeria. And Nigeria, of course, is the largest economy in Africa. So that's a time bomb down the line. I just wanted to link this for folks that are not really economists so they can really understand the point that you're making.
Yeah, so I will go back in time. I'll call back some history and give some perspective. So the people who don't understand or don't know this can get a sense of, you know, context. You see, if you go back to 1999 and you look at Nigeria's fiscal position, you bring it down to 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, take it to 2010, 11, bring it to 2014, 15, and then bring it all the way where we have it today. You see a nexus. So, 1999, we had external debts of $38 billion. Sorry, was it 38 or $28 billion? And we had internal debt of about 795 billion naira. Nigeria didn't have any rating, any sovereign bond rating. There was $1 billion of FDIs on a yearly basis. The exchange rate was 98 naira to $1. And then OBJ came, started with the reforms, started talking to the Paris Club of Creditors, and they gave him some conditions: public finance reforms, fighting corruption, consolidation of the banking sector, increase of their gearing ratio, make them more strong and more reliable. And then, he brought the CBN governor, they did recapitalization, they brought the number of banks from 89 to 25. They also asked for him to ask the Senate, National Assembly, to amend the CBN Act. And in 2007, when that CBN Act was amended, for example, Ways and Means was created, 2007. So watch that from 2004, 2005, when most part of that debt, about $22 billion of it, was written off. In 2006, Fitch and Standard and Poor's, they started writing ratings for Nigeria. They included Nigeria in the basket of countries they write ratings for, sovereign ratings, and then institutional sector ratings. The first rating Fitch gave Nigeria, I think, was in February of 2006, was BB minus. BB minus is in the lower investment grade, not prime, but it's at the top of the lower investment grade. And you notice that between 2005 and 2006, when they wrote off that debt, foreign direct investments went up from about $1.8 billion to about 4.4. Then it went up to like 6.8. Then it went up to about $11 billion in 2010, which was the peak, the highest it's ever got into. Notice there's a nexus between exchange rates, your debt position, your foreign direct investments, and your credit rating. And notice that from 2007, when that act was amended and Ways and Means was created, that window moved. That debt window moved from $0, zero naira, to about 272 billion naira, and then moved up to $869 billion when Jonathan was leaving office. That was where he left it. The point I'm trying to make, Carlo, is that there is a nexus between your debt position, your fiscal position, your exchange rates, your credit rating, and your GDP. Nigeria has a problem, and the problem it has is that this government has pursued a position that has strangled foreign direct investments, because when you have so much pressure on the naira from currency devaluation and depreciation, it causes like a disconnect between your official and parallel market, considering that Nigeria does not operate a floating exchange rate, operates a fixed exchange rate that the CBN does not have the liquidity to fund. This difference between the official and parallel markets When Jonathan left, it was between 181 and 196. When he left, Buhari took over. He's moved from 196, it moved to 502, came down back and stabilized at 360, 307. That was the difference. It stayed there for a bit. If you notice that the foreign direct investment during that period, when the exchange rate was between 307 and 360.65, it was still around $3 billion. But when the market took off from 2019 and that ways and means started accelerating, you could see that the GDP per capita started dropping. Foreign direct investment started dropping, dropped below $2 billion, about $1.5 billion. The exchange rates widened, the difference continued. Foreign direct investments dropped, foreign portfolio investments dropped, net export proceeds dropped. The only monies you were getting was diaspora remittances.
Interesting.
And then oil receipts also dropped. The CBN said that, look, oil receipts dropped from $30 billion per month in 2014 to $0 and near $0 in 2023. So there's a nexus. And there's a disconnect in the approach that this government has had, because it believes that I don't know how a government believes that, look, you can violate the law and expect that things will still work out.
So, I mean, what I do here is this: that the policies are not designed for growth. Most folks might not understand that the oil and gas industry in Nigeria is really a negative, nil, zero growth in terms of GDP for years now, and the growth has come from the non-oil sector. And if you look at the non-oil sector in Nigeria, it's anemic as well, less than 3%. Right now, we've got Dangote has become the largest, should we say, exporter in Nigeria, non-oil exporter. But I was arguing with someone, Dangote is exporting urea fertilizer, which is gotten from ammonia, right? And that's also gotten from natural gas. So in essence, is urea non-oil or is it oil? If you sort out that argument, you will find out we really haven't done a lot in 8 years. We've not done a lot in 8 years, which is why the economy is not growing. Like you said, Kelvin, you've attached it to debt, you've attached it to the borrowing of the federal government. Those are weights pulling down the economy and not allowing the economy to rise. Kevin, if we may, I've got some guys waiting. Let's get some guys in here to ask a few questions before we take our next issue of inflation. Uh, IK Boo Boo, you've been here. Did you have a would you want to have a question, or do you want to just hold on till Calvin is done? Evolution, you've got the mic, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Um, my question, or rather, my confusion is this. Let me explain. NNPC is obligated to supply the local markets 445,000 barrels of crude oil per day for local consumption. That is, NNPC is meant to be given the state refineries. The same NNPC entered into a 20-year agreement with Dangote Group where they must supply a minimum of 33,000 barrels of crude oil per day for the next 20 years. Minimum. Of course, it must be more. And they are on record. The minister of the NNPC, the Minister for State for Petroleum, and the NNPC main person, Mele Ikiari, on different occasions, they have stated that NNPC owns 20% of Dangote refinery's production capacity. 20%. This was in response to a question that was being asked on what do they call subsidy removal again? There is a word that
Modulate.
the regulation. Yeah. This was in response to a question on deregulation. So I am a bit confused, looking at the near term and the short term. What exactly is the policy direction of government?
So I want you to
Government is,
make that a question and go
yeah,
there.
yeah. What exactly is the policy direction of government? The government is saying that we will remove subsidy. All the political candidates are saying that they would remove subsidy. But in practice, it appears the government is putting in place structures to ensure that they still control the supply of petroleum products. Any thoughts and how it will affect the exchange rate, considering that it is actually petroleum products that is causing dollar scarcity?
Okay,
If we stop,
let's
yeah,
get Kevin, let's get Kevin to John. Kevin, he's basically saying that there's it's not congruent between the passing of the PIA that says we've deregulated, we've devoluted powers, but still the NNPC is still signing agreements with Dangote to supply petroleum. They bought over, I believe, the old Owando infrastructure. So more or less, are we just changing the name, or are we really deregulated this downstream industry more or less? That's what I think I infer for what he's asking. Do you have the thoughts on that?
Carlo, that's a question to
Yeah.
me, yes? Well, you know, the agreement between NMPC and Dangote, 20% they are expected to supply crude oil feedstock about um 30,000 barrels on a daily basis. They've decided to sell the feedstock in Naira, as in the ones they are not
Yeah.
supplying. Says that the amount of feedstock NMPC supplies to Dangote determine the amount of derivatives that it gets in PMS back. And this is also because the board of Dangote realizes that, look, it has dollar debts, billions of dollars it has to pay back, and that it has an exchange rate situation it has to deal with. There's an exchange rate risk because you have all these derivatives you're refining into and you're selling in Naira, and there's an exchange rate risk of converting monies to USD to pay back your debts. So for me, it's not. I want us to appreciate the complexity of this thing because it's not a simple argument, and I don't also want us to take all on this topic and say we're going to oppose the government's position. The government has a position on this. As much as we want to talk about the inefficiencies and the failures of the government, we also have to realize that the partnership between NNPC and Dangote is complicated. Number one, um, petrol prices will never come back below 200 naira per liter. It won't. We need to accept this. We need to accept that regardless of the fact that NNPC has a stake in Dangote and they are supplying crude oil feedstock, NNPC cannot compel Dangote to sell petrol at a particular
But the
price.
question, Kevin, let me stop you. The question is this: what if I, Kalu, exported cocoa to Netherlands and I took my cocoa proceeds and bought diesel or PMS and I brought it back to Nigeria? Why can't I sell at the price I want to sell, even if it's at a loss, to just get my naira and dollars out of Nigeria and back to Nigeria? Why can I do that? Is that allowed?
So you see, that's the whole premise on which Julius Berger built the processing plant they built in Lagos, yes, on cashew nuts, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken. They built a vehicle to take their dollar out of Nigeria. The only problem with that is the CBN is saying if everybody does that, there will be no NXP proceeds available for us to be able to supply the primary dealers with the US dollars they need to be able to stabilize the rates. Because there are four major sources of FX for CBN. There is trade finance, there is oil receipts, there is diaspora remittances, and there are FPIs, foreign portfolio investments, and foreign direct investments. Okay, if everybody goes the route of look, you do that switch and you bring your this thing back to be able to take your FX out of Nigeria, there will be no NXT proceeds
Yeah,
for the CBN. So the argument is for the
but
central bank.
Kevin, again, just to follow up on that question, is this: it's possible to do that, right? That means Nigeria gets the PMS at any price, which means it's competition, or should we say monopoly, that is keeping these prices higher. Because who cares how the CBN gets the dollars? CBN gets the dollars from crude oil sales. I am talking about as an individual. This is the question Evolution is asking. Why can't I, if I make export my cocoa to Holland and I get PMS from Holland, why can't I sell my PMS at 100 naira? Let CBN go look for dollars from crude oil sales. This is the point I think we're
Well,
trying to get to.
well, first of all, there are rules. So there are rules on origin, the bank of origin, the bank from which your papers were processed for you to be able to export. That if you process it from Zenith Bank, your money must come back to the account with Zenith Bank. There are rules, CBN rules on that. Secondly, you don't have a license to bring in PMS into Nigeria. License is given to specific companies. DPRO that was converted to, is the NMDPR, used to be the agency. Now the NMDPR is the agency in charge of giving license. If you don't, it's just like last year when the Association of you know aviation companies, commercial aviation companies said they wanted license to be able to bring in their own Jet A1, and the government refused flatly. So not everybody can get license, because if you do that, then it means that even the bank can say, okay, everybody can just walk up and say we want a license to be able to bring in PMS into Nigeria. So that those are the two. I'm trying to situate you between the government's rule and
Yeah,
regulation that
yeah.
restricts just anybody from being able to
This
do
this
that.
goes back to the question: why do we need licenses to bring in PMS? Right? I don't have a license to bring in a phone or rice or cars. I pay the taxes, right? So I think it's going back to this question of that they've used NNPC Limited and to say it's an open market, but it's not. The only way prices come down is via competition. So if I can't bring in my own PMS at my own price, prices will never come down. But if I can, then prices come down. This is my point. Why do I need a license if it's deregulated? Is it NNPC competing with me? So why should NNPC or DPR give me a license, Kevin? Sorry to take you back, but I want to just get to the bottom of this.
Well, first of all, Kalu, you see, the problem is the exchange rate. The exchange rate. Secondly, it is backward integration. We've overflogged this issue of, how can Nigeria, where it is an oil country, not be able to refine its own crude oil? Refine its own crude oil into derivatives. We've overflogged this issue. And there's a commercial size refinery coming on stream, you know. So, first of all, you need to do backward integration. You need to ensure that a particular portion of your crude oil is not sent out without being refined. Number one. Number two, the business of PMS or Jet A1 or the dual purpose kerosene or AGO is not a business even in developed countries that is free for all. There are rules, there are licenses that has to be given. Not everybody can play in that space. That's the reality we have to accept. Okay, we have to accept that only a few companies have the capital and the resources and the technical capacity to be able to manage in that sector. It's now the role of the government to provide the environment to ensure that they are providing those products at prices that are competitive, but that creates for stability in the economy and in the system. That's the work of the government. The problem you've had with diesel, that is deregulated, for example, is that fact that Russia was cut off oil embargo on Russia, problems with gas. A lot of the refineries in Western Europe, in Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, in the UK, they were short on feedstock on crude oil to be able to refine to diesel, and it strangled the prices. Simple economics. When product supply is low, prices go up. The off-takers that were bringing products to Nigeria had to jack up their
Okay.
price. If you deregulate, and this is a problem that NMPC also has with PMS. If you deregulate it, the exchange rate will impact it because the subsidy that takes off that net difference has been cut off, and the market now has to go. Look, Carlo, in Ghana, 1 liter of PMS is $1.20. 1 liter of diesel is $1.29. In Nigeria, 1 liter of diesel is $1.12. If you deregulate PMS, well, you know where PMS prices are going.
Okay. All right, Ken. Good back and forth on that, right? So let's quickly hop into inflation. I want to just get us on track with inflation, if we could, Kevin. And if you look at the numbers for inflation, I mean, food inflation 23%, ordinary inflation 21%. Inflation in the world has been driven by high energy prices. In Nigeria, inflation has been driven by high food prices. We've had double-digit inflation well before the Ukraine-Russia war. Kevin, what are we doing wrong? How can we bring this down? And why is this a problem?
So there are two um, sides to this argument. There's a cost push and there's a demand pull. The cost push is in the area of too much supply of cash that are chasing so few goods because industrial production output is remained relatively stable at where it was, maybe 7, 8 years ago. It's not increased. And then there is a demand pull issue of lack of backward integration. And I'll tell you how the nexus between the monetary side to it and the fiscal side to it. So first of all, you want to look at, so for example, at 1.5 million barrels of crude oil that is drilled every day in Nigeria, 9 billion cubic feet of gas is let out from wellheads. Out of that 9 billion, today is about 1.52 million barrels on a daily basis. Out of that 9 billion cubic feet, Nigeria has a gas capacity utilization of 32%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's because there is a lack of infrastructure to be able to take up, either process into, you filter, you dry, you compress into CNG, you filter, and you pipe PNG, or you liquefy into LNG, or you process into liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, which is where you have your cooking gas, your aerosol cans, your AC gas. AC gas has gone up significantly. If you ask our audience today who are listening to us, they'll tell you that the price of AC gas has gone up significantly. And, the fact that diesel prices went up 300% within the last 11 months affected the price of power and the price of transportation. That in turn affected food inflation. So you can see that energy prices plays an important role. And the reason why the government is unable to tackle this from an energy standpoint that has ate into food inflation is that the government has failed to provide the environment and the counterpart financing required to be able to utilize the gas that it generates. For example, and this is also because last year I was privileged to present a paper to a ministry and on CNG. And this is also because if you take advantage of compressed natural gas, you set up mother-daughter stations. So, for example, look at BRT in Lagos. Price of diesel went up 300%. I heard that at some point they were forced to reduce the use of AC in BRT buses. They raised the fares. The average Lagosian earns between 50 and 70,000 a month. You can imagine the amount of money Lagosians have to pay in transport and food, and how that has eaten into their income on a monthly basis. Why don't you convert the BRT buses and the rail buses into gas? You change the engine from fuel combustion or diesel combustion to gas combustion to see that you're using gas instead of diesel or diesel. BRT buses uses diesel, the rail buses uses diesel. Okay? Why don't you build more compression and processing plants for LPG, for CNG, by ensuring that you deregulate gas
So
prices.
Kevin, is the argument that inflation in Nigeria is caused by high energy prices? Because I mean, CPI, this is a consumer price index that tracks the basket of it does
Kalu,
petrol.
Kalu, Kalu, there's a correlation. There's a correlation. There's a correlation. And I will bring it back to you on how the fact that the government has not addressed the energy problem also has led to the spate of borrowing that it has embarked on. I'll bring it back to you. You see, um, look at LNG, look at Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Company. Between 1999 and 2015, LNG generated 85 billion US dollars in income, in revenues, in that intervening period. 85 billion US dollars. In that core investor sale, the Nigerian government owns 49%. The other companies that are part of the joint venture, they own 51%. Within that period, NLNG paid out 30 billion US dollars to the Nigerian government. Rather than the Nigerian government to reinvest its profits, the retained earnings, back through FID and build more trains. For example, Train 7 that was supposed to have been built since 2013, would have added another 8 million metric tons and raised it from about 22 million metric tons, which is where you have it today, to 30 million metric tons. Kalu, that has a capacity to add $30 billion in revenues to the Nigerian government on a yearly basis. So if you raise, Kalu, if you raise your capacity for LNG, for example, you have more revenues to the government. You increase your revenue to GDP ratio, and you rely less on debt, which has caused the same inflation we're talking about. Because the more you don't have revenues and you have to borrow money, the higher the inflation goes, because you have to resort back to ways and means.
Okay, let's discuss this, right? So what I'm saying is this: inflation in Nigeria is 50% driven by food, which means in my village, my small village in Ohafia, there's lots of cassava, but there's no Gary in Lagos. So cassava goes to Gary, it goes to Lagos. There's no Gary in Lagos, it's expensive, but in my village it's very, very cheap. Inflation is saying that that inflation is high in Lagos because there's no cassava or Gary in Lagos. That's what the numbers are saying. You are saying that it's high because of the cost of energy and that the government is not reinvesting. But the fact is this, that there is no cassava or no Gary in Lagos. Even if the government reinvests that output, like you rightly said.
I'm not, Kalu, I'm not discounting the fact that there is a serious problem with the output for food production in Nigeria. I'm not discounting it. I'm just telling you the impact of energy prices on food. Now, if you come back to actual production, I'll pick specific examples. So it's not really that, even if I would say yes, there is a problem of shortage of feedstock, because the people who convert cassava into biograde ethanol are competing with the people who convert cassava into industrial starch. They are competing with the people who convert cassava into gari. And then they're also competing with people who convert cassava into high quality cassava flour, HQCF, that is used to add in the blending of flour in Nigeria. Because since Russia, Ukraine, the ratio of high HQCF that is used in blending flour in Nigeria has actually gone up. Okay, so I will make for the argument that there needs to be an increase in the output for cassava in Nigeria, primary production. I'll make for that argument. Okay, but there's also the problem of the fact that cassava has a shelf life. When you harvest cassava and you cut it away from the roots, which is the cyanide, it has a between 24-48 hour shelf life within which you have to use it, unless it goes bad and becomes poisonous. So what companies are doing is that they are converting that cassava into dried flakes.
Oh, no, but
and then
sorry to cut you in, but I'm not really talking about cassava as a crop impact. Pick any group: rice, maize, pick any. The point is, there's rice in Kebbi, there's no rice in Lagos. You can pick anyone. And inflation in Nigeria is driven by the fact that rice is in Kebbi, but it's not in Lagos. That's why we have inflation. that there's harvest all over Nigeria. There's mangoes in Benue, no mangoes in Lagos. When I mean Lagos, I mean the cities, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Jos. The cities have no food. The hinterland has got food. There's a disconnect in infrastructure between the that's
Yes. And one major point of that disconnect is energy price. Another major point of that disconnect is the fact that we're a country that relies a lot on haulage through road. We've not built the cargo rail infrastructure required to distribute goods around Nigeria at a reasonable
okay.
cost. We've not built infrastructure. It's easier to cargo goods from Kebbi or from Gombe or from Taraba or from Yola to Lagos by cargo, by rail, than it is to take those trucks that leave, for example, Yola, 5 o'clock in the evening in a line every evening from Yola to Port Harcourt, from Yola to Calabar, from Yola to Lagos. And you see, because of the increase in diesel costs, because of the increase in security, the goods in transit costs, insurance costs, the security risk, the energy cost factors in to the cost of distribution of goods around the
Okay.
country.
Okay.
So that's
I
the
agree.
problem.
So I mean, where does this printing of 23 trillion ways and means, does it affect inflation directly? I mean, we have people don't really understand that 20 trillion has been printed, but it's not captured anywhere. That money is still not part of the debt of Nigeria. It's sitting in the Central Bank of Nigeria. Even if we're paying it, but that money has already entered into the quote unquote money supply of Nigeria. So when the CBN Monetary Policy Committee sits, do they say we are raising interest rates to mop up our own printing, or is it just the money supply that the government has spent through the budget? Do they take into account this 23% that they've printed it? Do they do that?
So, that's what they like to tell themselves. But the reality on the ground is that I'll say this, and I'll say it with my full chest, because the CBN has not presented audited statements, his audited statements to the National Assembly as required in the CBN Act for about 5 years. It's not presented it.
5 years, no annual report.
5 years. It's not
Banks
presented it. I'll say this anyway. I'll say
have
it.
to present annually, but the Central Bank of Nigeria has not presented an audited.
They've not presented their audited statements in 5
Can
years. It's been
this right?
backdated.
We saw an audio. We had an audio where the central bank governor was talking to the auditors, or they were having a discussion amongst the central bank governor staff, and they were talking about the audit report by the auditor that had said that they have to about the 500 billion loan given to state governors. And apparently, the state governors had said that they were not going to pay back because they had no money. And on that audio, the leaked audio, the central bank governor was heard saying, where's he going to get the money back to make up the accounts? That audio was leaked. And a few days later, the central bank governor released a circular saying that states cannot be insolvent. And because states cannot be insolvent, then the loan cannot be written off. That is what I
And
from
I and this, Carlo, this goes back to loan loss provisioning by a central bank. At the end of the day, if the states are saying they cannot pay back, and you don't have like a legal vehicle to justify the CBN giving the states loan,
yeah.
yeah, how do you now enforce an irrevocable standing payment orders that was not signed in the first place on the FAC accounts of the states to debit from source as a way to compel them to pay back? How do you do it? Because there's no legal vehicle for which CBN is giving the states loan. Tell me the legal vehicle. None. On what basis is the central bank giving loans to the states? It doesn't have a basis. So what you have today, is you have these loans hanging. Federal government does not have the capacity to pay back the money. It wants to convert into a 40-year government bond at 9%, between 8 and 9%. The only problem with doing that is investors are not going to buy.
What does that mean, Kevin?
That means you're going to raid the pension fund,
What?
the pension commission, the Nigerian pension, the pension commission, and use pension money to buy. And that is negative
You
return
are
on
going
yield
to get
on
a lot of
the pension
you're
of
going to scare a lot
Nigerians.
of people. Just to be clear, Kelvin, the PFAs have a fiduciary responsibility to their contributors. The PFAs have a fiduciary relationship or a responsibility to their contributors, not the federal government. The money in the account is held in custodians owned by the private sector, secured by biometrics. So there's no money in that. Now, I remember when the government first came to power, there was a lot of talk about that the pension fund has 16 trillion. Let's go and get it. I think they then understood there was no cash. This money is all invested. We are simply managing assets worth that amount of money. There's no cash for you to debit and buy Land Cruiser. So what I'm trying to say this time, that it's not automatic that anyone can take PFA money to invest in a bond. The PFA guys are investing in government bonds because they are risk-free and they pay very, very high yields. If those same bonds,
And then you can see that the risk-free rate has
yeah,
also
so
gone
if
up.
those bonds come out at 5-6%, they're not going to buy them. The PFA,
No, so the question is, the government will now be forced to raise the
all
this
right,
thing, the
gotcha.
coupons.
Kevin, let's get some guys. I've got Wandering with his hands up here. Let's get Wandering Warrior. Good day, sir. Thanks for being patient with us. I want to just run through Kevin with a lot of issues. But you've got the mic, sir. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Carlo. I think you've probably asked most of the questions that I was going to ask, but I'll just change them. Question for you, Kelvin. Without filtering your words, what is the true impact, or what is going to be the true impact? Let's say come April, the government decides to remove the subsidy. Can you tell me the good and also the bad, how it's going to affect the middle class, and then also how it's going to affect the lower
Oh,
class? My second question is probably going to be around the monetary policy of CBN printing 20 something trillion dollars there. I'm not really sure about that. What is the true inflation in Nigeria?
interesting. Kevin, it's a great question.
Okay, so first question, um, if the subsidy is removed, the next president that comes in 1st of June, maybe 12th of June, is going to send in a supplementary budget to the National Assembly and ask for the budget structure to be amended. It's probably going to free out maybe 6 trillion naira that would have gone into under recovery. No, it's going to free out about 30 trillion because they would have spent about 30 trillion from now till June that would have gone into under recovery back into the budget. It's going to probably reduce the amount of debts that the government wants to use in financing the 2023 budget, reduce it from about 8.8 trillion, which is about 20 billion US dollars, reduce it down to about 5.3 trillion dollars, trillion naira. That will impact on the amount of debt servicing that the government will have to take into the sinking fund for 2024. And that's also going to impact on the reliance on areas like ways and means and debt from either the internal bond markets, internal debt markets, or external markets, bilateral and multilateral organizations and partners, and then the local domestic markets. Like if you look at the domestic debt profile, 73% of that is bonds, and then you have them promissory notes given to companies under export expansion grants, and all of them incentives the government gives, industrial incentives acts, and then you have them sukuk bonds, green bonds, and the wherewithal. So if you can free the government of the commitment of paying for subsidy, it will change the budget structure entirely by about 25 to 30%. On the side of the people, it's going to mean that more of their income, that it's not going up, because the pace of increase of their income is nowhere near the pace of inflation in Nigeria. Yeah, for transport and food that they use in meeting up their basic needs. So it's more pain on the people. But the reality like we have it today, is that unfortunately people have to bear the pain. The question for the government, which was what I was trying to discuss earlier about alternatives the government can deploy to balance energy costs in Nigeria, is as a country that has the ninth largest proven reserves of natural gas, about 2.209 trillion cubic feet, is Nigeria going to be, is government going to be wise enough to deploy the power of gas to equalize the impact of the regulating PMS? That's the question I have for the Nigerian government.
Let me,
You know,
before you go to the very, very good. I think that the subsidy has already been removed. And I believe that Nigerians are already paying the post subsidy removal prices. We are paying it already. If, like you said already, we are not paying, the subsidy is gone, but for political reasons, they're not saying the subsidy has gone. But right now, as I speak, in January, the 21st day of 2023, the subsidy is gone. You know it, I know it, all of Nigerians know it. So, what's the impact? The impact, of course, is that the budgets or the savings of every Nigerian has reduced. That's what it means instantly, because you have to reduce your food and buy fuel, or reduce your education, or reduce your NEPA, or you have to go and borrow, or you get a loan or income increase. That's the situation right now that we are on. So to his first question that he asked, wondering what's the impact, it's going to be more suffering. There's an economic term called misery index, which means high inflation, high unemployment. That's going to go up in Nigeria today. It's already been going up since 8 months ago when there was no fuel. So, like you said, without missing words, that's your answer right there. There's going to be more suffering. But in your question on how Kevin answered it, there's a way to remove subsidy without causing this pain. There's a soft landing for subsidy. And the way I believe you do it is this: you remove the subsidy for the rich guys like Kelvin. You take away their subsidy. And you relieve the subsidy for the means tested, quote unquote, poorer class in Nigeria. So you can simply say this: if you earn below a certain amount of money in Nigeria, and you have a car or you have a generator, you have a BVN, you have an NIN phone. Take that generator, this chatting number or the picture or whatever, go and register that generator in the Nigerian, what they call it, the safety, road safety. So if it's your car, registration. If it's your generator, go to road safety and register it. That registration will be attached to your NIN phone. The government every month can give you 5,000 naira e-naira credit from the federal government to your account, your BBN account on your NIN phone. This means when you buy fuel with that, you buy fuel without subsidy, you have a 5,000 naira cash inflow, not cash, e-naira, to your NIN phone, which you pay the vendor with. What you do is that you eliminate fraud because it's not cash, it's e-naira. You also make it Nigerian, because if you are not in Nigeria, you can't do NIN, you can't do BVN, you can't get that facilities. That way, the poor folks with a phone, if you want fuel subsidy, go and buy a phone, get NIN, register either the car or generator with road safety, and you get a government 5,000 or whatever amount every month. If you do it this way, the rich folks that can afford it will be able to pay higher petrol costs. But the poorer folks will now have this direct subsidy from the government. Why would the rich guy not register his car? Because you are tying in each car to NIN. That's going to be a tax for you. So if you want to get your fuel subsidy on two cars, you of course will have to pay more tax. Well, now the government knows you own two cars and will tax you. Also do it by engine capacity. If you drive a Jeep, it's V6, you don't get any subsidy. If you drive the small Fiat, all those small cars that use less fuel but are also cheaper to buy, which means you don't have all that money, you also get a subsidy. That's, I think, the way they can do it to reduce the pain. But the subsidy is already gone. It's already gone. Wondering, what was your second question? It was a good question. I think I've forgotten it. So it had to do with. Can you ask the second question again, please?
It's relating to the monetary policy of CBN printing.
20.
I think 22 trillion, and also what's the true inflation in Nigeria currently? We know it's
okay,
around, I think, 20 something percent, but I don't think that's a true inflation number.
okay. So that's a very fantastic question, and thank you, Kalu, for buttressing and extrapolating the points I made earlier. So personally, I believe that Nigeria's inflation is above 40%. There's a distortion between and NBS, Nigeria Bureau of National Bureau of Statistics, has about 10,400 respondents across 36 states and the FCT that collect data for it. Between data collection and transfer of that data from the respondents to NBS, where it imputes into multilinear regressive models to calculate the cost price index on sectors and then come out with the headline numbers and look at the percentage increase or decrease month on month, year on year, there is a distortion somewhere. And the reason is because, over the last 45 days, Nigerians have had so much difficulty buying PMS, particularly in different parts of the country. States in Nigeria where people buy petrol for 500 naira per liter. Bielsa is an example. And it's difficult for me to believe that inflation slowed down at the same point when energy prices have been on the rise. Difficult for me to believe it. Now, on the issue of CBN ways and means, I'll say from when Section 38 was included into the CBN Act of 2007, and the federal government started using it as an option to raise financing for the budget, plug holes, deficit holes in the budget. That number has gone up to where it is today, between 2007 and today. But what is interesting for us to note is that between 2007 and 2015, the Nigerian government borrowed only 869 billion naira, less than a trillion. Between 2007 and 2015, the Nigerian government borrowed less than a trillion naira from that window at 869 billion. In fact, OBJ left Nigeria's debt, both domestic and external, at 2.4 trillion naira when he was leaving office. Then 2.4 trillion naira because he left at the exchange rate. The exchange rate he left was between 118 and 120, if I'm not mistaken. You could say that he left it at somewhere around maybe $20 billion at that exchange rate. Then, between 2015 and 2023 that we're in, that window has gone up from 869 billion to 24.5 trillion naira. So we're saying that this government has accumulated 23.5 trillion naira in ways and means, and that has informed monetary policy. It has also informed the fiscal strategy in the medium-term expenditure framework of the Budget Office, in coordination with the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. That has informed policy making. And folks don't realize this because this is so sensitive. It's ways and means is more sensitive than normal government debt, like a 10-year bond, a 7-year bond, or borrowing from IMF or AFDB or the World Bank, the IBRD, or the government of Japan or Germany. It's more sensitive. It's more sensitive because when you create money out of thin air, because the central bank has a capacity to do so, and you violate there's a reason why the framers of the constitution capped it at 5% of real revenues, because you understand that if you exceed that level, you will cause a bubble in the system where you have so much M1 cash supply chasing so few goods because your level of industrial production is not rising as fast of your supply of money into the system, and you push inflationary buffers that alters monetary policy altogether. So as we speak today, CBN has an MPC meeting on Monday. There is nothing monetary policy can do to ameliorate the situation with inflation. But I'll tell you categorically that Nigeria's real inflation core is above 40%. Because Ghana is at 51.1%, 54.1%, and they're facing similar problems. And in my opinion, other than the miscalculation Ghana has and the fact that it has a debt to GDP ratio of 84%, and it's unsustainable because of the old FX quagmire it has, Ghana, in some ways, is in a better fiscal position than Nigeria. But we don't realize how deep our problems are yet.
That's an interesting take that Ghana is in a better fiscal position. I don't know if I should allow you to explain that or if we should just let maybe Okonko. But I'm wondering, did you get, I mean, Kevin gave you a really, really broad answer. Lots, yeah. Was that satisfactory to you? I mean, in long and short, is that we've overborrowed and we're in a debt pit. That's what it is.
Ye-
Our
Yes,
debt,
thank you
our
very much.
total
Thank
debt
you.
is $171 billion, Carlo.
Not just
That's the total
the problem is
position.
not just a cannot pay this money back. The naira and the dollar debt. If we do the saving grace is that this government's going to leave office. This government's trajectory would have increased the debt. We're at 77 trillion because I'm already adding the ways and means. We're at 77.
Yes.
Explain to me how you pay back 77 trillion at even 5% interest rate when you are paying fuel subsidy. The saving grace for Nigeria is that the government is leaving. If this government continues, we can never ever pay back this debt. Ever. Because they are doing boneheaded policies of borrowing to import consumption. But if they leave, and Kevin, I was going to take you back. When you were answering the question, you said the government will pass a supplementary budget and all that. It depends on who wins. It depends on who wins. We have three
Absolutely.
guys, right?
Absolutely.
Atiku, Peter Obi, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Each of them have got two separate ways that they want to address this. I believe the Atiku and the Peter Obi, we understand what they want to do. We've seen it before, right? The one we really haven't seen before is the one that Bola Ahmed Tinubu is proposing. That's brand new to Nigeria. He's talking of if you want to understand what Tinubu wants to do, go and Google what, is it Roosevelt? Theodore Roosevelt did in America after the Great Depression. That's what Tinubu wants to do in Nigeria. Essentially, what does Roosevelt do? They just printed dollars. They will pay you to dig a hole, then they will pay you to cover the hole back, just to give you income. And that income was for you to go and spend. The idea being to shock the economy back to life. Nigeria's problem is consumption. Nobody is consuming. We don't have one in Nigeria. That's why you see in Nigeria all this everything is sachet. There's rice sachet, toothpaste sachet, cooking oil sachet, because no one has money to buy anything. So you make it into sachets so you can have sales and going on. So what Tinubu wants to do is to boost consumption, right, and to get the economy going. The problem with that is that you need to spend gargantuan amount of cash. When Roosevelt tried it, it didn't work in America. What made America leave the depression, the Great Depression, was the Second World War, because they went to 100% full employment. For what Tinubu is planning to work in Nigeria, you have to employ everybody in Nigeria. So everybody will get a job, everybody will get an income, so that everybody will spend and everybody will get sales and everybody will go and buy. That's how it works. We've not seen that before. Let's see what will happen, Kevin. I don't want to really go, but it's very interesting. But let's see what will happen. Okonko, you've got the floor, sir. Go ahead. Okonko Ntia. Go ahead, sir. And
Evening, everyone. Can
I
you
can
hear
hear
me?
you very well, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been quite honored to listen to you guys speak and throw a lot of light on the macroeconomic situation in the country. I'm going to make some statement and ask some questions. I believe that a lot of fundamental distortion in our economic system. Every system should have some checks and balance. The level to which the federal government has gotten money from the CBN through ways and means. How come there was no systemic capacity to check that trend? I would have anticipated that the legislator should have had some oversight. Now we're being told that somehow government is sending some notice to the legislator to try and regularize that process. And sadly, that did not go with details. It questions the drivers of our economy. What is the relationship actually between the CBN and the federal government? Recently, we were told that the Minister of Finance was ignorant about the reprinting or redesigning of the Naira notes. One would have anticipated that the key drivers of the economy should have been working together to address this inflation. We've seen CBN raise the MPC, and nothing much is really changing in the system. And my question still remains, who are those driving Nigeria's economy? And then what can be the answer towards taming this inflation, whether in the short term, the few remaining months of this administration, or the new administration that is coming in? Also, let me also ask, is it possible that the new or incoming government, either Bola Tinubu or what is it called, the Labour presidential candidate, or the NNPP or PDP, can find a way to boost our production base? Because we're talking a lot about consumption. Like the first subsidy thing, if the Dangote refinery comes in, the Borila refineries are able to come in, would that not help save the level at which we import petroleum products and help us now add value to our petroleum industry such that we now export and are able to earn foreign exchange? Although I'm still thinking, but Dangote refinery is a private business, government has gotten some stake in it. How does that money trickle down into some sort of revenue for the government?
Good questions.
I don't know if you're getting my drift here.
Okay, so
Because
first
we must
question.
find a way. Hold on, I'm trying to wrap it up here. We must find a way to ensure that somehow a better level of foreign exchange inflow comes into the system to boost our revenue. A lot of projects going on, infrastructure and all this. How much of these projects are revenue generating? We are hearing what is it called now? The Ohanese question government's intention in tolling the new Niger bridge. I mean, I just kind of wonder, if you don't toll it, how do you recoup the funds, the loans that have been put inside that project? So these are just the poses I'm trying to raise here. If we can get a better insight, is there a way this government can come with a better economic team that can drive our economy? Because I don't seem to see drivers of Nigeria. I can't really say it's the private sector that is driving this economy. Somehow, it's as if the economy is not being driven by any particular individual who understands what needs to be done to create solutions. Yes, somehow we can assume that subsidy is gone, but there is no formal position on the government in that sense. Because what you're hearing is going to go in May or June.
Let's get Kevin to. I don't want you to, because you.
So I think I can wrap it up here so that Kelvin can come in.
Got to ask a lot of great question. Number one, you asked about the oversight of that whole process, right? And number two,
yes.
What can we do going forward? I mean, Kevin will answer, but just to say quickly to you, there are laid down clear in black and white oversight over ways and means. I mean, this is passed by law. The law is there, passed. You cannot borrow more than this, even if you back. What happened, sir, was that people simply ignored the laws that were passed in Nigeria. The central bank governor and the assembly all not. And I'm saying, I'm going to say no. I do not blame Mr. Buhari or the executive. They want to spend. That's their calling, to spend. The central bank's law was passed to make them independent and to act as a check on spending by allowing them the latitude to raise interest rates. But They got Emefiele and they played him for a fool. They offered him the position that he should run for president. He agreed to run for president. So in his mind, he was doing campaign funding for his party. Thus, all those monies that the central bank spent, the 23 trillion cumulative and that they spent to date, was campaign financing for the All Progressives Party of Nigeria, done by the Central Bank of Nigeria's governor because he assumed he was running for president. Hence, it was campaign financing. We've seen how that has played out. The laws are there. Section 30.
So, sorry,
No, no,
let me just interject here briefly, just briefly.
hold on. Section 10.
Based on what the DSS is trying to do,
No,
from what you're saying now,
I'm just looking for other.
are you saying that? I know. I'm just about a few seconds. I'm not taking much of your time. Do you think, based on this background, that the DSS might be right in going after
The
him?
DSS is not going after him because of ways and means. They are going after him because of some stamp duty nonsense. It has nothing to do with these ways and means.
Wow.
DSS is
Okay.
using this cover. If you notice if you go online, you see what one House of Member was saying about stamp duty. That's what they are after him for. Not ways and means is connected to the president, so they won't go after him for that. They are trying to use the cloud of confusion. This was Emefiele. They played 419 on him, and he's printed 23 trillion and gave to politicians to run a political campaign. This is what happened, pure and simple, because the law of CBN is right there in black and white. You cannot lend more than 5% for the year, and even when you lend 5%, you must pay back that 5% in the year before you borrow new. But all that was ignored. National Assembly also saw those laws and kept quiet. Now they are covering their tracks. So National Assembly has asked for hearings on ways and means. Ways and means they did not oversee. They're asking for hearings in February. So Kevin, go ahead, sir.
So, Carlo, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Okonkwo. First of all, I'll say, as regards oversight for ways and means, a suggestion to National Assembly is to codify sections 38 of the CBN Act. By the way, I think the CBN Act is due for another amendment, entire amendment. Sections 9, sections 11, sections 24, sections 38, and a few other areas I think should be amended. That says the CBN cannot unilaterally violate that 5% of real revenues for the previous accounting year without getting approval from a vote at the Senate. Two-third majority has to approve for the CBN to violate 5% of real revenues for the previous accounting year. That's one thing I think they can do going forward to discourage the abuse of it. Because when the presidency thinks about going to the Senate to compel them to violate that act, they will think again. And this is played out in the whole back and forth. I think they held them during the course of this week. There was a hearing at the Senate, and the senator said they will not approve ways and means until they get, number one, the Ministry of Finance and CBN to present accounts on how the monies has been spent so far that are justifiable, and get the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the CBN to come to the Senate and answer tons of questions they have for them. And they've also said that they are going on recess by second week of February, and that if by second week of February these conditions are not met, they will go into the elections because they are going for campaign without passing securitization of ways and means. Okay, that's one area. On the second question you asked about how do you reflate the economy and bring in revenues, I'll tell you what. So first of all, you need to understand that the primary reason why foreign investors are not bringing either hot money FPIs, non-speculative foreign direct investments, and the reason why the participants at FMDQ, NAFEX market cannot, for example, in that forwards market, be able to create 10-year forward contracts and allow companies to, price hedge their risk, of doing business in Nigeria, especially the MNCs, is that you have multiple exchange rates. The government, RUT 200, they spent $190 million to bring in $9.8 billion. How do you spend the $190 million to incentivize $9.8 billion in FX inflows? It's ridiculous. Float the Naira. If you float the Naira, you increase the amount of Naira that the government gets from oil receipts, number one. You bring in that FDI flow, FPI and FDI will go up because as we speak, only about 11 or 12% of the monies in the capital markets comes from foreign portfolio investors. That has dropped significantly from somewhere around maybe 49% like 10, 12 years ago. Okay. You also bring in non-speculative foreign direct investments because investors can price risk. Right now, they cannot price risk because they are like, the airlines are a good example of it, both for capital and profit repatriation. They're a good example of it. How do you bring in money into a country where you don't know how to get money out? That's the problem. You can apply back channel strategies like Julius Berger did with the cashew processing plant, but why would we want to divest from our core business into something else to be able to take FX out of Nigeria? It's just too much work. Companies should be able to price risk, and the external risk of currency devaluation and depreciation should not be higher than the internal rate of return. Okay, that's on one hand. On the other hand, the government needs to realize that the key to raising the revenue to GDP ratio is by focusing on gas. Yeah, focusing on gas. Now, there's what they call the Associated Gas Reinjection Act, AGRA, from 2018, pre-PIA, that says the Minister of Petroleum, either Minister of State or Minister, he has the right to issue gas flaring permit to companies that cannot find elimination and utilization uses for gas 12 months after they start operating an oil field. That's what that AGRA Act says, which means basically that somewhere around 90 out of 155 oil fields that are licensed in Nigeria are under AGRA. They have gas flaring permits. And what that basically says is that they can drill oil, the gas that comes out of the wellhead from drilling oil, they can flare it and nothing will happen. And you cannot now impose an increase in their corporate income tax as punitive measure to get them. And the reason is because the government has 49% stake in NLNG. So the government takes 50% of the blame for flaring gas. Are you with me? Now, you have to utilize your gas. Nigeria has at 1.5 million barrels of crude oil drilled every day. Nigeria does 9 billion cubic feet of gas. Okay, the US has 14 LNG trains. Yeah, it does about 24 billion cubic feet of gas on a daily basis and 35 trillion cubic feet on a yearly basis. Yeah, it has a 90% capacity utilization. For you to be able to, bring in revenues, you need to focus on bringing capital in, either from external or internal, retained earnings from the dividends and taxes that NLNG pays to the federal government, take it back, don't spend it, don't take it to the budget and spend it, collapsing excess crude accounts into either the sovereign wealth fund or the consolidated revenue fund, okay? Or you privatize an NPC, implement PIA, privatize an NPC, sell 20% stake, do business process re-engineering, business transformation, sell 20% of NNPC on the London Stock Exchange, raise capital, invest in train 8, train 9, train 10, increase Nigeria's LNG output from about 22 million today to 40, 50 million metric tons per annum on a yearly basis. That will bump up your revenue to somewhere around $10, $12 billion on a yearly basis. If you do that, somewhere around 40 or 45% of your revenue challenge in your budget is wiped off automatically.
Those are all that Kevin has said. 24. So yeah, great job, Kevin. Thanks for that. Okonkwo, I think Kevin has really given you some point by points there with policy, implementable policies. Not all doom and gloom. I mean, we're here to critique, but we also want to give solutions because it's our country too. Let's get to Lokbe. Kevin, I still have questions for you. Let me get to Lokbe in here because I think he might have something to say. To Lokbe, I got you here going once. Tulokbe going twice. I can't pronounce his name. Is it Richie? Is it Richie?
Good evening,
How
Carlos.
good?
Good evening, everyone. So I've been following the discussion. Can you guys hear
Yes, I
me?
can hear you. A bit muffled, but you're
All right, right. All right, so I'm following discussion from the beginning, and I've learned a lot. Seriously, I've learned a lot, and I've gotten a lot. So I just have like I think two main questions, and maybe if anyone pops in my head. So the first question goes like this: like we've seen a large number of debts made by the Nigerian government. They've borrowed a lot. I think our budget has increased since 2015. Our budget has been increasing, and they've put a lot in construction. Now, my main question is because I feel like they put a lot in construction and they neglected in so many other industries. Was that a very good bet? Was that a
what
good?
construction
Um,
talking
outlet?
about? Yeah,
Can you
what
hear me?
construction are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about
I,
infrastructure. Sorry, infrastructure. I think that one makes.
I
Can
can
you hear
hear
me?
you. Yeah, I can. You're clear. I'm just wondering the infrastructure you speak.
No, like the major infrastructure tax that they've taken. They've done. I think they've done every. I think housing in every state. Can you hear me?
Housing in every state.
Housing plan in every state, so many other stuff. So I'm just
I mean, yeah,
asking, like, was it worth it? Was it worth it to take that large amount
Kev,
of debt to
you're not
try
gonna,
and fix? Can you hear
Kevin's
me?
going to answer. You're not going to like my answer, but
I know. So I just let me just second question too because I follow Kelvin too. So I want to even put the second question to
okay, that's
Kelvin.
fine.
So the second question is Kelvin, most of the time you talked about the ways and means and how they want to put it into our debts, and you're always against that, and I like you for that. You're always like the money they're putting there will be put on us as the citizens because we're going to end up paying for the money. But most of the time I read those tweets, I don't really see your follow up questions to what we should do next to prevent it and what are the solutions that can be preferred to those to stop them and what are the solutions I can provide to solve the problem because a new administration is entering in and surely they have to solve the problem of the ways and means that was exponentially increased and how they can prevent it and how they can solve the debt as of now. So those are the main two questions. I can't hear anybody, man.
Yeah, I hear you. Kevin's going to answer. I'm just going to say this. I think the government has done a lot in infrastructure, like you said. I think the
Yes.
work they've done is real. Lagos to Ibadan. They've done Lagos to Ibadan. They've done a lot of
Mm-hmm.
bridges. Second Niger Bridge. What else do I think? They've done a lot of roads, arterial roads. But this is the question for you. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
The most important road, in your opinion, in Nigeria, in the entire Nigeria, which road do you think is the most important in the whole of Nigeria?
So sorry. If I get the question right now, I won't even pick any road. If I was to
No,
pick
no,
at all,
there's an
if I
answer.
was to pick at all, I won't even pick any road.
There is an answer. There's one road that's the most important road in all of Nigeria. There's just one road, and it's just one road. Is the Apapa Port
Okay.
to Ibadan road because that's where all your imports come from.
What I'd have even picked were the ports itself, like because Kevin mostly talks about this, like um,
All your
all the ports should be working. Okay, sorry, go on.
all the imports in Nigeria, right? Maybe night your railroads, your crude oil,
Yeah.
bulk of it comes through Lagos. And
Mm-hmm.
so that Papa, you have 3 ports in Lagos. The new deep sea port in Dangote is in Lagos. They are all in Lagos. So the most important road in Nigeria, the Lakaji road that connects Lagos to Kano is in Lagos. The Lagos to Calabar, Lagos. Lagos to Ibadan, Lagos. So the most important road in Nigeria is the Papa Ibadan Express Road. That road
Mm-hmm.
has not been completed in not in 24 years. Not
Yeah.
I've added the PDP 16, I've added the APC. It hasn't been completed.
Mm-hmm.
There is no horizontal rail line in Nigeria. Horizontal means it's going from inside Nigeria. The rails in Nigeria were built by the British from Kaduna to Lagos, from Borno to Port Harcourt. If you notice how they were built to export raw materials. So we take out
Mm-hmm.
the raw materials out to Britain via the rails. The Nigerians have not built one across Nigeria, which means that is a trade rail that takes, say, maybe goods from Lagos to Calabar, or say Kogi, cassava, maybe to Benue, or Benue mangoes to Lagos. We haven't built any lateral rails in 58 years. The airports in Nigeria were all done by when we got a loan from China in 2023. The rail from Lagos, from Kaduna to Abuja was done with the loan from China. The Abuja Intercity Light Rail was done from a loan from China. These were all done before 2015. The Sukuk bonds that were using to build roads, wonderful idea. Those were done now, and those have been well implemented. I like the spread. Every region gets the same amount of money. I love that. It's happened. It's doing very, very well. The tax to infrastructure credit, which says the private sector can build roads and get its money back from the tax guys. I love that as well. LLNG is building a huge road in Boro. M10 is building in Onitsha. Dangote is building in Kogi and Lagos. Wonderful. That's my take on the infrastructure. I think this tax infrastructure thing was a game changer, a real winner. They waited too late to do that. If they had done that from 2015, they would have done a lot in Nigeria. So I think they did some very, very good policies. They waited late to do that one that is the real winner. This infrastructure to tax credit, they waited to do that. But if you cannot fix Lagos to Ibadan Express Road in 24 years, then what is Nigeria doing? I'm not attacking any government. This is purely
No. I get.
24 years. You cannot fix. Do you think Ghana or Singapore or Kenya will take 24 years fix an express road, the most important express road in their country? That's the problem with Nigeria. Kevin, did you have anything to add, sir? It's a great question.
Very much. So, in regards to what he said, I think he was very spot on the structure of, you know, I'll call it like the economic roots in Nigeria. You have the map, and then you have the economic roots. You look at the Nigerian map, and you've basically dissected the structure of it and its inefficiencies, how there is horizontal and there are no vertical lines running from the southeast into the southwest. And I think you're spot on. And this calls back to the question earlier on how energy plays into food inflation and the fact that cargo rails are more consequential for distributing food across Nigeria than road haulage. So you're very, very spot on. Well, as regards this question on securitization of ways and means, I think it's important that there is audits, there's forensic audit on how the monies were spent. That the people at the Ministry of Finance and CBN can give an account of how the monies were spent. And then going forward, they place a caveat that condition they're going to approve securitization is that they're going to amend Sections 38 and require for the National Assembly to actually approve for that limit to be violated in the future. That is very important. Yes, I'm against it, but I think that there has to be consequences.
Yeah,
because
the money has
this is at the center. Sorry.
The money has already been spent, right? This money has already been spent. So really, can anything happen?
Are you asking if anything can happen?
Yeah, can we say we're not going to securitize it? That's my question.
Well, at the end of the day, it has to be, but before, as a precondition on the side of the senators for getting their votes for approval to securitize the DMO to securitize it, I think they need to place some conditions that CBN Act be amended, and that in the future, going forward, the CBN will have to come to the National Assembly to get an approval for that limit to be violated. There also need to be an audit. I mean, I said earlier that CBN has not presented audited statements to the the Senate in 5 years. And between 2019, for example, and 2023, the budget of the central bank has gone up from 520 billion to 2.3 billion.
Wow. I mean, crazy stuff, right? Crazy stuff. So I don't know if your questions were answered sufficiently, ML.
I mean, yes. I think.
Those are great questions. Kevin, I still have questions for you. I think we've only done GDP and inflation. I want to quickly get your thoughts on this other guy, just to make sure that we take advantage of your presence here with us. You've been here for give or take an hour and 45 minutes. We're talking about the macroeconomics. I want to open up the floor to questions for you, Kevin. But before I do that, real quick, what's your take, Kevin, on should we say the exchange rate in Nigeria? Why is it 700? Then the other guy is telling us 435, i.e. CBN. CBN says 435. The black market says 735. Who is correct? That's number one. Number two, do we want a weak naira or do we want a strong naira, Kevin? If we can do this, then I can open up the floor to questions. Please, Kevin, help us.
So Carlo, the real rate is 745. That's the real rate because that's the rate that has liquidity backing it.
Okay.
I'll tell you. You said?
I said Kevin said so. I'm just saying who said it.
I'll tell you categorically that one of the reasons why there's been pushback against floating the naira, changing the exchange rate mechanism from plus or minus 30 naira on a daily basis to a free floating rate where there's willing buyer and willing seller is because of round tripping. There are people in government, people who are kingmakers that control the people in government that rely on allocation from the central bank on a weekly basis for round tripping. If you float the rates and there's only one exchange rate, there'll be no business for them. That's a fact. So for me, I'm like, look, you need to allow the market to decide. You need to have a willing buyer and a willing seller. The key to bringing investments into Nigeria, the key to unlocking the energy sector too, apart from the whole gist on LNG, unlocking the other areas like CNG, like PNG, like LPG. These investors will tell you categorically that they cannot have a situation where the external rate of devaluation and depreciation is actually higher than the internal rate of return. It doesn't make any sense. So you have a problem. And that also impacts on the issue of how to find a forward curve for the forward markets in Nigeria. There's no way to find a forward curve because no market maker would be willing to stake their capital in these FX markets because you don't know where the rate is going to be in 1 month's time. How do you price your risk? How do you calculate where you enter and where you exit? There's no way. It's like you jumping into a river and not knowing the bottom of the river. You have to be able to measure the depth so that you know if you're going to float or if you're going to sink.
So I mean, in a sense, the strong naira policy of the central bank is weak. Is not good for Nigeria. Is that what I hear you saying?
You see, Kalu, if you want to run an economy where you can capitalize on a weak naira, you have to switch from being import dependent to being export driven. You have to switch from exporting raw materials to exporting semi-finished and finished goods. Yeah. And then importing finished and semi-finished goods, but ensuring that your current accounts it's not in the negative like you have in Nigeria today, where Nigeria exports raw materials and import finished goods. Okay?
Yeah.
You have to switch your strategy. And for you to do that, you have to go back to backward integration. I'll give you a classic example, Kalu. So the Obasanjo's government drafted Nigerian sugar master plan, NSMP, under the National Sugar Development Council, NSDC, in 2004. It was amended by Olusegun Aganga, who was Minister of Trade and Investment in 2012, 2013. The target was that they were going to build production capacity in Nigeria from the current about 55,000 metric tons a year to somewhere around 1 million metric tons within 4 phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, within a period of about 10 years. Carlo, as we speak, Nigeria does not produce up to 100,000 metric tons of sugar on a yearly basis. Nigeria consumes 1.6 million metric tons of sugar on a yearly basis. And it has problems on this because in that NSMP, for example, it says the government, the CBN, restricted the importation of sugar to only 30 companies: Dangote, Bua, and Golden Sugar. Okay?
Okay.
That policy says, Carlo, that policy says these 30 companies cannot increase their quota for importation of sugar unless they increase their primary production capacity on the ground, which is invest in plantations, invest in sugarcane stocks that are able to produce higher metric tons. Nigerian variety does about 70 metric tons per hectare. The varieties in India and Brazil and Russia, they do about 170 to 180 metric tons per hectare. Yeah. Invest in irrigation. Okay. Invest in machinery that you need to be able to, grow sugarcane in Nigeria. Then invest in the plants that you need to process that sugarcane into sugar. And the interesting thing is that if you actually solve the problem of sugar and get to phase 4 of 1 million metric tons, which is somewhere around 65 or 70%, maybe 65%, you will also solve the problem of biograde ethanol. Nigeria imports 440 million liters of biograde ethanol every year.
Mm.
And it spends about $1.1 billion in importing that. If you solve sugar, you solve ethanol. About 70% of the ethanol that you import will be wiped off because as you solve sugar, you're solving biograde ethanol.
Mm. So,
So for you to be able to switch, you need to focus on backward integration, and there needs to be political will.
I
So
hear.
you go from net consumer and importer to net producer and exporter, and you get effects.
All right.
Hi, Kevin.
Kevin, that's awesome. Kevin, let's take this home, right? For the few time we have left, let's just see if we can answer all the questions. Lots of guys with their hands up. I just had a very, very nice, interesting exchange with a gentleman. He's not Nigerian, so he sent me a DM and he says, "What are you guys talking about?" Let me read the exact. He said the Nigerian debt to GDP is very good, much better than developing nations. So he quotes the debt GDP of about less than 40, which is the same thing that you see all the government guys quote. And I said, yeah, but debt doesn't pay, GDP does not repay debt. We have no money, we have no income. Right now, there are fuel lines in Lagos, not Lagos, all over Nigeria, I'm speaking to you. So look at the situation. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. Our GDP is larger than South Africa and Egypt. But the Nigerian citizens today, as I type, are lining up 4 a.m., 3 a.m. to buy PMS in this largest economy in Africa. Kevin, let's take questions now. I've got Washara. This is Ben Kingsley Washara. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Go ahead, sir. Ben King 443. You've got the floor, sir. Go ahead. Banking is not available. Let's take Mr. Nas. Nas 1820. Mr. Nas, you've got the floor, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Carlo, and thank you very much, Mr. Kelvin. I think it's been a very interesting session for me so far. So I just wanted to talk about two things. The first one is the question, then the second one, first one is a contribution and probably a clarification. Then the second one is the question. So my contribution is I've been struggling with the fact that Carlo said that subsidy has been removed. And I say this on two premises. Now, the first one is the fact that as at early this year or late last year, thereabouts, the NNPC came out and said that the landing cost for PMS to Nigeria is about 510 naira to a liter. So if you put that and you juxtapose that with the amount to pay for PMS, then I should think that there is a way that probably government pays the differential. That's one. Then the second reason why I'm struggling to understand the fact that subsidy has been removed is if you benchmark our buying price for PMS with that of other African countries, you feel that you understand there's a clear disparity. I'll give, for instance, like like in Rwanda, I was in Rwanda, Rwanda, the equivalent of naira, the equivalent in naira of a liter of PMS in Rwanda is about 800 and something naira. And of course, if you look at, Europe, you look at the United States and everything, and look at how much they pay for PMS, and compare that to the amount to pay in naira. So I don't know who paid for that differential. Is that differential between the benchmark prices and what we pay in Nigeria? Isn't that the subsidy they talk about? That's the first one. Then the second one, and I think Kalu made mention of it. Now, when we talk about moving Nigeria from consumption to production, right? Now, what would you recommend? I think this question should be directed to Kelvin. What would you recommend we do? Should we look at a situation where we will float the naira, or should CBN still defend the naira? Bearing in mind that for as long as CBN defend the naira, what it means is, it means that probably are supporting importation of this thing of goods, and also it means that the local production or the local companies, the local industry will not be able to compete, with imported goods. So I don't know what you would suggest. Should we probably float the naira, make it expensive for people to import goods into Nigeria, thereabout, revitalizing the local industry, or should the CBN, continue defending the naira, in the coming years? So that's my contribution. That's my question. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, before Kevin answers, just a very, very quick one. I am saying the reality is that the subsidy has been removed. There is no official pronouncement saying subsidy has gone. But ask any Nigerian queuing up to buy fuel by 2 a.m. and they will confirm to you that the subsidy has been removed. Look at what Kevin has said. It's a political decision not to take off subsidy in January 2023 because we have an election coming up in February 2023. But like Jesus said, you know the seasons by the times, or how do you say it? You can tell what's going to happen by looking at the seasons. We all know that we can no longer fund subsidy. We all know this. So once I believe that the elections are over, you will see the real policy will come out. The Minister of State for Petroleum, Timothy Prius Silva, has already said that he does not feel bad if Nigerians are buying petrol for 300 naira a liter, because in his words, he says he's paying a subsidy. So they've already given you the format or the expo on where this is going to go. So I will not be surprised if they take it off. That's what I'm saying. The reality today, there is no subsidy. That's why you are queuing up to buy subsidized PMS. Kevin, I think he said the second question was for you. He's asking what will be the way out if we're going to go from consumption to production. What do you think are the step by step that need to happen?
So I'll answer his question on. Thank you, Carl. I'll answer his question on the exchange rates and the economy, and I'll bring it from sections
Sorry to
24.
interrupt you, Kevin. Like whenever you speak, I actually don't hear you. I don't know if it's just me or it's everybody. Whenever I speak, I actually don't hear you.
I think it's your line. I'm so sorry. You might have to, but you're going to miss his answer. But you might have to refresh because I can hear him. So
Okay.
yeah,
I'll just quickly leave and come back.
Okay, quickly. Then maybe he can answer. It will be recorded, so if you do miss his response, you can always grab the recording. Yeah, but for others, maybe you should answer just for the others that are on the queue.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take it from sections 24 of the CBN Act. And you see, we need fresh thinking. You talked about the CBN using foreign reserves to defend Naira and how wasteful that is. The foreign reserve, I think, has dropped to about $37.11 billion. You see, 26% of Nigeria's international trade is with China. 26%. 11% of Nigeria's international trade is with the US. 96.3% of Nigeria's foreign reserves to the US is Federal Reserve. 2.7% of Nigeria's foreign reserves to China. But there's an interesting point in sections 24 of the CBN Act that says the central bank is only allowed to invest in countries with currencies that are freely floating, which talks about convertibility risk. I'm going somewhere. For me, personally, the impediment to the Central Bank of Nigeria increasing the share of foreign reserves it has with the People's Bank of China, that it's required for the PBOC to be able to supply commercial banks in China to settle international trades with Nigeria directly without having to go to a third party currency like the US dollar, is impeded by Sections 24 of the CBN Act. They can't invest more than 5% of their foreign reserves, of Nigeria's foreign reserves, without amending Sections 24 of the CBN Act. And this is the reason why the Naira Yuan swap from 2018 failed. Because there's no liquidity to back settlements. You need a situation where if you're floating the Naira, your dependency on the US dollar reduces, because 26% of Nigeria's international trade is with China. Post Russia and Ukraine, countries are beginning to change their foreign policy. Israel in April last year, included the yuan in its basket of currencies. There are risks. China comes with the risk of, system of government, the risk of the yuan is actually not a freely floating currency, but the Chinese government has enough liquidity to back its currency. That's the difference between China and Nigeria. Okay? We need fresh thinking. But the point I want you to take out is the fact that the strategy of using your foreign reserves to defend the Naira, it has failed, it is failing, and it will never work in the future. The way to stabilize the rates, depending on the path you want to follow, whether you want to follow a weak Naira that is export driven and has a very decent current account balance in his balance of trade, or you want to follow a strong Naira that is import driven. It depends a lot on the points I've raised earlier: backward integration, or the fiscal strategy paper that affects the amount of debts the government holds and its dependence on ways and means affect currency and inflation, or you actually, switching from importing everything to exporting in areas as semi-finished or processed products in areas where you have comparative advantage. So, for example, look at that AFCTA framework. Yeah. Look at the instruments of ratification. 10% exclusive and sensitive. The Nigerian Office of Trade Negotiations, NOTN, is going back and forth with the CFTA Secretariat on that 10% list, on the items that falls under exclusive and sensitive, on areas where other African countries cannot import or dump into Nigeria, and on areas where it's completely non-negotiable for there to be competition from other countries in Africa. Okay? That is an important debate right there. The level of economic integration in Africa is about 15 or 16%. The level of economic integration in Europe is around 65%. The level of economic integration in North America is above 70%. In Southeast Asia, it's somewhere around 57%. So Africa has a lot of work to do. And Nigeria has a lot of work to do in this AFCTA economic integration within Africa to position itself as a net exporter and not a ground for dumping or veiling. Okay? So these are the areas you have to focus on to reflate and rebalance your exchange rates.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. Like but the other thing I just want to, just a follow up question to that, how will, if for instance we choose to say, okay, we want to actually reposition the exchange rate, basically in the short term, and how in the short term will it cause a ballooning of the dollar against the naira, and for how long will that exist? Like, will it just be like a short term trend? Eventually, when we start exporting and everything starts coming up, then everything will balance, or will it be sort of something that could exist for for mid to long term?
You need to get all the four cylinders firing. Four cylinders: trade finance, diaspora remittances. Now, the only one that's firing right now is diaspora remittances. trade finance, because the companies are not bringing their FX into Nigeria. And this goes back to what we discussed earlier on why companies are not bringing their proceeds back to Nigeria. Okay, on the issue of the risk, convertibility risk that you have. Okay. And if you look at the statements that Moody's and Fitch wrote in downgrading companies in reaction to downgrading Nigeria's sovereign rating from B1 to B2 and from B2 to B3 for foreign currency issuer debt. Yeah. You see that they also mention convertibility risk in downgrading around 9 banks and around, I think, either 3 companies or 12 companies, if I'm not mistaken. I've forgotten the number. You need to understand that unless you have the 4 cylinders of FPIs, FDIs, 1, oil receipts, 2, and look, my first book is going to be published next month. I've not said this out publicly anywhere. I've just said it to a few people that are close to me. I've finished the manuscript. It's going to be published next month. And one of the things I talked about is how the Nigerian government needs to rethink its membership of OPEC. Go back to examples from Indonesia, especially Qatar. Qatar left OPEC again in 2019, January. And think about the fact that Nigeria, no matter how much they increase capacity in its deep offshore land basins, it cannot exceed 5 million barrels per day in production because of limits and policies in OPEC. OPEC is basically like a combination of Saudi Arabia and the US government. It serves their interests. In my opinion, OPEC doesn't serve Nigeria's long-term interests. And the reason I say this is because Nigeria has to move from the era of producing oil and exporting crude oil to the era of producing crude oil, refining the crude oil into derivatives, and exporting to other African countries and Southeast Asia and Europe. It needs to make a shift. If you make a shift, then your OPEC template becomes invalid. That OPEC template that we've had, where OPEC gives us every month, you have a production quota and then you meet it, and it's still that template is still. The government needs to move from this point about consumption to production. It needs to move from this current petrodollar economy. You get revenues, and then when PMS subsidy goes off, for example, under recovery on PMS subsidy, oil receipts starts coming from NNPC into the federation account. You pay cash calls to JV partners. The balance goes to FAC from CBN, and then you credit to 3 arms of government. That model is stale. NNPC needs to go to a market model where you can change your leadership. You can change your leadership, the leadership of NNPC. You can do business transformation, internal restructuring. You can float on maybe the London Stock Exchange or the NYSE, raise capital, $30 billion, sell maybe 20 or 25% of equity, have the board appoints, shareholders and board appoint a new management team, and then go into a JV spree. Gas, fertilizer, refineries. Saudi Aramco owns a refinery. They own the largest refinery in the US in Texas. Motiva does about 600,000 barrels of crude oil daily into different derivatives like PMS, AGO, Jet A1, DPK, Petcoke, LRG, bitumen binders, different derivatives on a daily basis. And they sell to the US market and they make money. You make more money. You have several multiples when you process the crude oil that you pump into different derivatives than when you sell crude oil, which is the OPEC model we currently operate.
Thank Kevin. Let me just say this, and just for us to also, someone is asking me also here, why do we have black market? What are we doing wrong? Can we cancel the black market? All those kind of questions. Should we float? Let us give a background, guys, just so that we understand what Kevin is also talking about. There are there are two ways you can run your. That's a good word. There are two ways you can run your exchange rate. One is going to be a pegged, where you peg your currency to another currency, usually the US dollar. So in one side, you can say my currency, whatever it is, I will peg the value to the US dollar. So like the Saudi, most of the Gulf countries do this, The Saudi, the Qataris, the Bahrain, they peg their currency value to the US dollar, right? So it's whatever happens, it goes up and down with US dollar. You can also unpeg your currency, i.e., you can float your currency and say, hey, I'm going to float my currency, and demand supply will determine what my supply the currency exchange. When you peg your currency, you have because that reserve is what you use to make sure you say you manage that peg. What I mean is this: if you say 1 naira is equals to $1, it simply means that every naira I have in my pocket is $1. So if I go to the central bank or to my bank and I give them 1 naira, they should give me $1. To make that happen, you have to stock a lot of dollars in the banks so that when people want their dollar, you give them. That's what the foreign reserve, that's where it actually comes from. Foreign reserve, you use that to manage your peg. So in Nigeria's case, we have pegged our naira to dollar, but we have said $1 is 4.35, is it $4.46 to one, which means that it's how it's supposed to work. If I take that 4.46 to CBN, they give me $1. But we all know this is not true, because if you take that money to central bank, you're not going to get $1. But if you take your 7.50 to the black market, you get $1. So Nigeria has a peg, but that peg is not driven by market forces because our foreign reserves cannot maintain that peg. The US does not have a peg. If you want to buy dollars today, you go on your phone, you can buy and sell dollars, euros, yen on your phone. You don't have to go to the Central Bank of US or Central Bank of Japan to buy your dollar. You simply buy on the currency market. So because they don't have a peg, they don't need a foreign reserve. The Fed can intervene in the market to move the market, the dollar price up and down. But the Fed is doing this to buy and sell currencies, right? But they don't have a reserve to do this because they are just intervening in the same market. The problem with Nigeria is that 446 or whatever that NAFEX rate is. We have told Nigerians that if you give us 446, we will give you $1, but it doesn't work. So what Kevin is saying is that if you float the exchange rate, if you say we're going to float it to maybe 550 or 600, then what you are saying that if I have a naira, I can get if I have $1, I can get 660 or 700 or even 775. That will allow foreigners to bring dollars into Nigeria because it's a real exchange rate. Otherwise, if they bring their dollars into Nigeria, they will not have dollars to take out to pay their dividends. So when you have this strong naira means you have 4,461 dollars, you are indirectly reducing the amount of capital that will come to Nigeria because there is no reason why I'll bring naira to Nigeria and pay and get 446 when I can put that same dollar in my pocket, land in Nigeria, and take it to my guy on the street and get 750. It doesn't make any sense. That's why you see that central bank has no dollars, but DOM accounts in Nigeria have close to 30 billion. 30 billion is in DOM account in Nigeria, but the central bank has no dollars because the DOM account is at 750, central bank is at 446. It's simple mathematics, guys. All right, guys, let's get Michael. Hi, Michael. Hi, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Kelvin, for the opportunity. I've learned a lot on this space on this short time. My question is on, the tech side of things. The tech side of things and as it relates to accountability, traceability, and transparency. So I don't know if it's possible. I don't really know if there are rules guiding this. Can't the CBN and also the Nigerian government employ a technology that enables citizens gain real-time insights of how they print money and how they disburse money? Because we saw what the CBN did recently, ways and means, how they printed, about 20 trillion naira, like we said. So my question is, can't we employ technology, for example, a technology like blockchain technology, the underlying tech that governs, most cryptocurrencies? I'm not talking about using cryptocurrencies for anything now. I'm just talking about the underlying tech that governs most of them. We understand that that technology gives us can, enable us gain real-time insight of how, how assets move, and also transparency. So can't the CBN employ such a technology that will enable citizens know when they are doing this, and enable citizens know how they are dispersing these funds? So that's my question. Are there any rules preventing us from doing this, or what's the challenge? That's my question.
Michael,
Kalu, this is directed to you.
your innocence is refreshing, and I applaud it. And I mean this with all responsibility, man. You see, can they do it? They can do it immediately. Will they do it? They would never do it. Have you ever seen any corrupt institution open up its books? Why do you think they haven't published another report for 5 years? The same reason, when there is opaqueness, you can be corrupt. Sunlight is a disinfectant. So if they do what you are saying, then they won't be able to print money anymore, because everybody will see it. So you are actually giving them a solution, not a question. You're actually giving a solution, not a question. Because if they do what you're saying, it solves all these problems. There is no. When did we hear about ways and means? It was when Sanusi started talking about it, the former CBN governor. That's when I first heard about that it was a problem when it was 4.5 trillion. No, and we kept quiet. It went from 4.5 to now 23 trillion. So I think you're not asking a question, you're actually giving a solution to the issues in the Central Bank of Nigeria. But it's not going to happen. At least it won't happen now. I don't know if Kevin has any follow up on that.
Thank you, Kalu, for the response. You've said it. I think a very good place for accountability is their statement, annual statements,
Yeah,
audits that's sent to National Assembly for approval, is available to everyone.
yeah,
That has been backdated, has not been done for 5 years. So you pretty much have your answer there. I mean, the statements will show you everything you need to know about what is going on at the central bank.
correct,
And if that has not been done, then you have your answer.
correct, excellent. No more.
Okay, thank you
Yeah,
so much, Kalu. Okay, for example, like let's say
you
by
got
God's grace, Peter Obi becomes president. Can we implement something like this, or we have a good president that's open to innovation?
it's
Is it
not
possible to implement this?
now. All you are saying is that you should put their accounts online. It's not hard to do. If you go online today in CBN, you see their exchange rate online. So they put exchange rates online. They put the foreign reserves online. Why don't they put the amount of M1 or whatever they are printing online? They have the data. They put some data online. Inflation is online. Exchange rate is online. Forex reserves are online. Why is the overdraft to federal government not online? Because they don't want you to know. So it's very simple. Like, great question, and yeah. So it's more of a solution. You're not asking a question. Actually, give us a solution to these issues. I hear you. Let's get banking 443, guys. We're gonna winding up. I've kept Kevin here for too long. I'm gonna let him go. So we've got Tukil, we've got Phil, and then we'll just call today. Thank you. So banking, got the floor, sir. Banking, you've got the floor. All right. Let me get
Is it me?
yeah. Go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Okay, it's Ben King, Ben Kingsley.
You guys,
Okay.
simple,
Sorry for.
simple.
Okay.
Just kidding, man. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I wanted to ask Kelvin something. I mean, he was talking about road. When you were talking about road, that was when I actually wanted to ask the question. Back in 2019, Buhari signed an executive order 7 on road infrastructure development and refurbishment tax credit, something that enables, rather that aims to get private companies help in road infrastructure development in turn, with the aim of deducting it from their tax or something like that. Yeah, I know. Back in 2019, that Buhari signed that order, and it was a welcome development. So I don't know. Is it still existing? Is it still subsisting? Because I believe if it's still subsisting up until now, we wouldn't be, or we shouldn't be having this issue in road infrastructure gap. So I don't know. Then one other question I intend to ask is this: with regards to floating of currencies. Seriously, I've me on my own, I've made researches so well that I've found that even the best currencies in the world, they float their currency. Sorry, the best, yes, the strongest currencies in the world have been floated. Why is Nigeria not taking a cue from this? Because because one of the effects of having your currency pegged at a particular rate is a discouragement of FDI. It discourages FDI. I mean, foreign FDI. I I intend to ask: is it that the economic management team in Nigeria, or the finance team in Nigeria, they are not considering these simple policies? Because these are the besetting policies that any regime can easily implement to improve both forex and all. So why is it not being implemented? Why are these things, why are we still even talking about it? Why is it still an issue? I mean, non-existing in Nigeria. Meanwhile, these are the easiest things, because I believe if a country is not doing well, they can take a cue from other countries, how they are doing, what the policies they've put in motion to, energize or develop their, or sorry, to get their currency, you know, um, rising. I don't know. Why is it not happening in Nigeria? I'm surprised. Thank you so much.
All right, Kevin,
So,
that's the last question, I think, for banking. I think I heard him say, one, why is the infrastructure tax policy still on? And then two, talking about the exchange policies and all that.
okay, Kalu. So the first question he asked is an interesting question under the Executive Order EO7,
Mm.
road tax credit refurbishment act. Forgotten the full name of that EO order, where companies are giving some kind of tax rebate for implementing infrastructure, road refurbishment, and development. I'll tell you what. Two areas. Number one, the government needs to pay attention to the cost of bitumen binders. Nigeria spent about 340 billion naira last year importing bitumen binders. That cost is rising because of the weak naira. And bitumen and diesel are two major areas for construction of roads. And considering how much roads you need and the modes of funding, either EO7 or infrastructure corporation, private public partnerships, talked about earlier the issue of the second Niger bridge and why it is being told, or Anaize protesting against it being told. And if you focus on the two areas through which Nigeria gets bitumen, for example, um, no, not it gets, will get if it implements it, natural bitumen, pitch lakes, or oil sands, which is the process of refining crude oil into derivatives. Ondo has a lot of bitumen, has a lot, natural bitumen that's not being used. Dangote is going to convert, one of the derivatives is going to get from processing crude oil is bitumen. Okay? Nigeria needs to process and get its own bitumen to reduce the cost of road construction per kilometer, number one. If you go back to when we started this session tonight, I talked about the importance of the government creating a policy environment for companies to invest in CNG, setting up mother and daughter stations, auto compression kits, convert fuel combustion to gas combustion engines as a way to reduce the dependence on diesel and reduce the cost of both logistics, haulage, and other areas that is required, energy is required for. These are the underlying trends you need to pay attention to in increasing the amount of roads and the cost of roads and how much it takes from the budget. These are the areas you need to pay attention to. I also think that there should be a limit to how much of that EO7 is implemented, because if you look at that executive order very well, you see that for every concession you grant a company to construct or refurbish a road, you increase the amount of tax that company pays to the government. So the question is, do you want to give these companies tax rebates, increase the amount of tax they pay, reduce the amount of tax they pay in exchange for them constructing roads, or do you want them to pay that money into the
I think I
Federal Inland Revenue Service and increase the revenue ratio?
They should not pay the tax to the government. If they can fix the road, let them fix the road. If the money gets to the government, the cost of cutting a tax eats away that tax revenues to salaries and all that. Look at FIRS keeps 4%, customs keeps 4%. If MTN wants to build a road, let MTN build the road. Let the government say this is the cost. Okay, build it and pay us about 15, 10 years. I think Nigerians are better with that approach. It reduces the cost of the government. Will the same tax money not go to building the road? So what's the difference?
So if we're going to go by this, then the government needs to pay attention to backward integration for bitumen binders and energy costs as a way to reduce how much the company spend per kilometer in refurbishment and construction of new roads.
Why the government? I just mean that. I mean the private sector. The road in my village is built since I was born. But if a company, there's a law before this law was passed by Buhari. There's an existing law in Nigeria under the NIPC, Nigerian Investment Promotion Council, that says if you site a company in a rural area, you get 100% tax credit. All Buhari did was to make this specific to roads. This law already exists. If you put a company in your village and there's no water from the government, no road from the government, no electricity from the government, you can claim 100% of that investment. So I like it because if you put a company there, you create jobs, you create wealth, you don't pay taxes. Because the government hasn't invested in that area. If you invest in that area, why should the government then tax you? So I would don't worry about the cost. Let the government simply say, okay, if we don't have the bitumen binders, that means your costs go up, right? Let's get smart people in regulation to say, people like you, Kevin, I will say, okay, this is the cost with binders. This is the cost without binders. We negotiate, we agree a cost, go ahead and build this road, and then we repay you because over time it helps the economy, it helps our GDP, it helps wealth creation, it helps.
Carlo, there are specific standards and rules at the Federal Ministry of Works for constructing roads. Or even if they give you approval for a company to embark on refurbishment or construction of a road, there are specific standards. There are different categories of roads. There are trunk A, trunk B, trunk C, trunk D roads. Okay, roads for federal, roads for state, roads for local government. So there are specifics. Yeah, in terms of the amount of stone base you have to use, the amount of bitumen binders you have to. There are specific rules that you must follow, and if you don't follow these rules, you're going to have issues, getting your rebates at the end of the day. So the point I'm trying to make, though, is that look, for you to maximize this and reduce the amount of tax that the companies claim as rebates, you need to, as a government, focus on ensuring that the amount of money the company spends on some of the direct and indirect cost of production is reduced. And the major area is bitumen binders that is imported.
No,
And
I
it's
agree.
imported,
I
and
agree.
the prices are high because of the exchange rate.
I agree with you. The point I'm making is this, right? If it's possible for the private sector, let the government in 2023 publish their total list of projects, water, road, education, health, publish the total list, put the cost by the side and say, we want to build a hospital in a half year, it's going to cost us 1 billion naira. Allow me, allow me and my union people, my town union age grade will grab that project, we will do it, the government will give us a tax credit. We can sell the tax credit. So we'll build the road in a half year. We'll sell the tax credit to Dangote. Dangote can import whatever he wants to import using my tax credit. So I go to the market. NGX can create a market for this tax credit market. I build that road in my village. You build road in your village. We sell our tax credit. So if I'm an importer, I go to that market. I buy import tax credit to import my thing, not related to a half year. That's how you create a market. So this way, my money is coming out. I have people that live in America, that live in Canada from my village. I get them together. We contribute $1 million. All of us. We take that $1 million, we build a road to a half year. We take our money and say, federal government will build $1 million road. They give us tax credit, $1 million. We go to the Nigerian Stock Exchange tax credit market, we sell it there, we take our money back. The importers will grab that tax credit and import and not pay customs. Who has lost? Nobody has lost. So I get your point about the stone base. I get that. I'm saying the mechanism. That way, Nigeria will just get multipliers of FDIs, FPIs, no longer welfare remittances, but this is investment going home. That's what I think we should do with our huge diaspora that we have everywhere. A guy gave University of Ibadan $1 million now. Is it University of Ife also? $1 million. A guy, one doctor guy. There are many like him that want to do the same thing, but there's no process to do that. So we have to be a bit more creative. Nigeria is broke. Nigerians are not broke. There's a big difference. We have to maximize our assets. And the biggest asset in Nigeria today is a diaspora. Not just a diaspora, even in Nigeria, there are rich people here that want to do something for schools and for hospitals. The government should give them a pathway. I think it would work. That's what I think, sir.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Last
Make
question.
very
Last
important
question.
points.
I want you to talk about your book more again, please, sir. To
Okay.
Kelvin, last person here, then we'll let Kevin go after two. I've got O_I Amide. Thank you for being so patient with us, sir. Go
Yes,
ahead,
good
sir.
evening, Kalu, and good evening, Kelvin. So, because of our time, I'll reduce my questions. So, the first one is, you said when you were talking about road network that time, you said our most important road was Lagos Ibadan Express Road, which I quite agree. Then I want to ask, how will the impact of opening our other ports lead to opening our other ports? Why have governments not opened other ports up, especially the south states that are close to the river, to the ocean, especially in south Ondo State, for example.
Mm.
Then another thing is concerning the Dangote refinery that you were talking about. If Dangote had put his refinery in Ondo State, it would have been closer to the bitumen, and if there was a port here. So do you think there's still in the future another opportunity for a big market industry, for the bitumen in Ondo State and for the ports that are in the south region and possibly Ondo State?
Wow. So, I mean, very, very, it's a recorded program, so I won't enter trouble too much. Let me just say this, right? The rumor I heard is that Dangote went to Ondo and the Ondo guys were asking for a bribe. So he left Ondo and went to, is it Ondo or what? And went to Lagos.
I didn't
So
want to
that's,
mention that because I'm from Ondo State.
so we
So
will say it
yes,
now.
I
Let's
just
say it.
the
Let's,
rumor, and I
so
don't want to, because we are
good.
here. So let's.
Like I said, someone told me, I didn't say I said someone told me. So the point is that state has lost that investment for life, right? Who will cite a bigger refinery than Dangote refinery in Ondo State? Dangote has got the southwest lockdown. Maybe they can go to the southeast and try there. Maybe the southeast would have learned from the lesson of that state in rejecting an investment. It's not the first time. I know I met a guy in America that works for a grade A. I'm not going to call the company's name. A grade A US Fortune 500 company, grade A, and he told me a story that he came to Nigeria to invest in Nigeria. He's a Nigerian was an American, right? They came here, he organized and they met with the president and everybody, and they agreed they're going to invest. I'm coding this thing. They're going to invest in something, and they got to go ahead to invest in it. They did an an inflow of nearly $100 million as a joint venture with the government. They inflowed the money, the company was set up, they paid in their share capital, the government was to pay in share capital. The money was used to pay for, can I say this? Used to pay for pension. I don't reveal too much. They used the money to pay for pension. The company asked the Nigerian government, why are you paying for pension with this money? This is money for working capital. We're going to use this money to import stocks and all that kind of stuff. Government says, no, it's money now. We're owing these people, we have to pay them before we can do anything. So the company there and then stopped and said, well, we can't do business going forward because we can't go back to our shelves and still want money when we have already put this money in and it was used not well studied for. That's how Nigeria lost an investment. This company is alive. Oh. It's not. I'm not giving you rumor. This is live story I'm giving you. So when states and countries break agreements just like that because they think they are government, Bill Gates wants to invest. You say, I want 20% equity in Microsoft. Who are you? Who are you? So this happens, and I think we should learn. we should learn from this. For the ports, sorry about that, guys. For the ports, I think it's a big conspiracy. I blame the governors of the Southeast, and I also blame the federal government. There's an Igbo proverb that says, if somebody wants to throw you inside fire, don't rub palm oil on your body. If you say that the federal government does not want to build a port for you, push them to build that port for you. What do? Go and get the design done. Get your investors done. Line them up. Then hold press conference and say you want to build a port. Let's see if the government will say no. But if you just keep on complaining every day, oh, they don't want to build Southeast Port. Oh, they don't want to build Southeast Port. Lagos State, the deep sea port that they are building in Lagos State, it's not a Lagos State project. It's a private sector project from guys from Singapore. In that deep sea, the first deep sea in West Africa. Do you know what the deep sea port is? That means all those big ships from China would go to Lagos and dock in that deep sea port. That means that Lagos has secured for itself in the next coming years tonnage of import will go to Lagos. If you are exporting goods from America, if you know that those goods are all put Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, they are all put together on one ship. The ship sails from America, then it transloads into Lagos, Senegal, all those, then it keeps on going. With a deep port, all the American ships will prefer to come to Lagos and dump all the West African cargo in that Lagos port there. Because they don't have to come to, they just dump their port and move on. So it's more efficiency, more productivity, but more money for Lagos State via that port. Akwa Ibom has crude oil. Akwa Ibom has the money. They have the natural harbor. Explain to me like a 5-year-old why Akwa Ibom has not built a port, deep sea port. Kevin is from that area, but they can build stadium, Bedness Stadium. They can build this, they can build that. No, I'm not blaming the Fed. I'm saying that if they don't want to give you a port, force them to give you a port. Imo State, not this Imo State of today, the Imo State of 1980, when you only had Imo and Anambra State, they built an airport. Everybody in the Southeast, every male, I remember my father would hold meetings in his house. Every male contributed towards that airport. It was unheard of. Not now that state government is building airports. This was the people contributed money, built an airport, then handed over the airport to the federal government. Well, the federal government said, we don't want the airport. The airport is there today. The Imo airport is today was built by individuals and the state government. The first private sector built airport in all of Nigeria. So South and Southeast states, nobody is going to give away its power. Why do you think the US is attacking China and doing don't sell them chips? If Lagos has an advantage in ports, they are not going to give it away. And I don't blame Lagos people for not wanting to give you ports. It's their right to be competitive. Your own right is to go out and get your own investors and build your own port. Calabar Port is there, dredge it. Julius Berger came a few years ago and said, we can ship any container you like from anywhere in the world. We will take it to Warri, then transload it to Owerri. Owerri has a port. There are barges that they use barges in Germany. You can bring those same barges to Nigeria and link it from Warri, from Calabar to Onitsha. Nothing stops you from doing that. We don't have to need a deep sea port. Onitsha River is not a sea, right? There's a seaport, or you say a river, Atlantic Ocean outlet in Ebonyi, in Anambra, maybe in Imo State. You can do a lot with barges and outside ports. Edo port is there, Warri port is there, One is there. All these things are all lying there waiting. So we can complain, I get it, but in the end, go and raise private capital, get the design work done, do up an SPV, get investor capital. PFAs have trillions. They're looking for good projects. Get something done in paper that is bankable, risk deferred. Get Kevin as advisor. Put something together and then say, we want to invest in a port. Then let people tell you, no, you can't invest in a port. Now you have them on record. But if you just keep on complaining, oh, they don't want to give Southeast a port, well, it's not going to get built. Kevin, this last, Kevin, sorry, last question. So if you have any comments on that, do a comment and then give us your closing.
No, I think Carlo has done justice to it. He even brought up the issue of the eastern flank, MPA, last time MPA. When I raised the issue on Arise TV last year, the MD of MPA said that Calabar has high salinity and there was a legal dispute that was just being settled out of court that kind of stalled the raising of channel gap for the Calabar seaport and has held, traffic to that seaport. For me, I'll tell you categorically that there's been a discrimination of the eastern flank, maritime in the eastern flank, for years. And this is the reason why it's difficult. And this also impacts on the cost of stuff, like we've explained over time and how it eats into inflation.
Yeah.
Because, for example, you can't import cars into any other part of Nigeria except Lagos. Lagos is the only part. So when people say, oh, Lagos generates the highest IGR, yes, that's because Lagos seaports are the only ones functioning.
Good.
Decentralized seaports in Nigeria, and you see the IGR of other states going up.
Good.
The way Nigeria is designed, Lagos is the only place designed to generate IGR. That's the reality of it.
Correct.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it there because Carlo has done justice to it. He has really explained.
Why did Tinapa fail? People abused it. Tinapa was crushing. Listen, years ago, I was a small boy analyst. I was in a room, and this guy came from Cross River. Back then, Cross River was known for only one thing, and I do not mean to be abusive. They were known for domestic help. This guy came from Cross River. My boss told me, come and take notes. I remember, this is a life story. I was in the room. My MD was in of an investment bank. I and this guy said it was the commissioner of finance from that state called Cross River, that they want to build, back then, want to build something like Disney. To be like Disney, it would be like conferences. Then I was looking at this guy like, are you crazy? Honestly, I was like, what this guy is smoking? That people will leave Lagos and go to Cross River to do what? That's what this guy was saying. He was talking about Tinapa. He came talk to my boss about Tinapa. That's why I was a bit curious. So this thing just started to go on and on. He showed my boss the study done by, I think it was KPMG, detailed study on they should go into agriculture and tourism because they had the natural attributes to go into these factors. This was a well-planned move by a state that had no crude oil. Cross River had no crude oil. So they said, how can we go from consumption, which is Cross River, they were consuming, to production? They said, we're going to go use it through agriculture and tourism. Well-detailed plan. So they built Tinapa in the middle of nowhere. This was the largest single investment by any non-government entity in Africa. Go and Google it. Tinapa. It was built. Not that it was abandoned, though. They built it. Film studios, hotels, water parks. It was built and completed. What did they need from the federal government? Number one, free trade zone status. Number two, dredge the Calabar Harbor. The states did their own. The federal government did not give them free trade status. They had free zone. It's not free trade zone. Go and Google it. They did not dredge the Calabar River, or they dredged it, then they do it again. So of course, stilt came in. That's why Tinapa failed. Today we say, oh, they built it, they didn't plan for it. No, they did what we asked everyone to do: diversify away from crude oil. They did their part. Nigeria failed them. So when other governors look at Tinapa, what do? They go for ShopRite. Because you can bring in ShopRite, you don't have to dredge anything. They open up one store, you take picture. That's your FDI there, ShopRite. We are killing ourselves in this country. Igbo say, he that holds someone down, holds himself down too. If you don't open up Nigeria because you are afraid that one sector or one state will get more bigger than another state, 100% of one is not the same as 1% of 100. It might give you the same answer, but it's not the same thing. 100% of one is not the same as 1% of 100. It might be the same answer, but it's not the same thing. Okay, Kevin, I heard about your book, sir, and I would like to say, please let us have more information. I think people are getting DMs. People are asking you, what's the name? Is it going to be available on soft copy? If it is, could you share? Can they make an advance purchase? I've seen those comments already here. Could you just give us a 1 minute intro of that book, sir?
Carly, thank you so much. I'll be very frank with you when I tell you that I haven't even come up with a name yet, even if I finished the manuscript. I think this week we're going to start the registration of ISBN with National Library, and then the whole process of proofreading, editing, advanced copy to a list of people that I have, including you, Sir Carlo, to do like a blog, a review and a blog for the book. It's going to be sent out. So I haven't even come up with a name, but it's mostly on macroeconomics and how to re-engineer the Nigerian economy, both from a monetary and a fiscal policy standpoint. Some of the ideas I've shared tonight are there, but extrapolated on it. And I brought the Constitution and as well as precedents in the book and how to re-engineer things. How to it's a little away from the normal thinking, the status quo, what the country has always done. I talked about how stale the OPEC model is and why Nigeria needs to move away from OPEC and go into a market production economy. And the whole talk of non-oil revenue for the government, I think it's a mistake. The reason is because, in my opinion, uh, oil and gas, for me, still remains the most veritable source of revenue for the Nigerian government. Look, if you, like I've said before, if you process at least 50% of all the crude oil that's produced in Nigeria, you get 4 or 5 times the revenue you get. If you increase the gas capacity utilization from 32% to somewhere around 70%, Nigeria is going to add about 15 billion US dollars in revenues on a yearly basis. And I gave numbers earlier on LNG, like how out of the 9 billion cubic feet of gas that is produced from wellheads on a daily basis, Nigeria only has about 32% capacity utilization. How Nigeria, the government cannot send a finance bill to National Assembly to amend, increasing punitive measure for corporate income tax for companies that flare gas in the upstream sector, because the government is part of the problem. Why they're unable to take gas from wellheads? You own 49% of LNG, NLNG. So how can you be blaming them when you refuse to put up capital, either external capital by selling an NPC or from the sovereign wealth fund, or from retained earnings that NLNG pays to Nigerian government. And I talked about the fact that between 1999 and 2015, for example, NLNG's paid federal government of Nigeria 30 billion US dollars in dividends and taxes. So if you, these are some of the points I made, but I touched from macroeconomics policy. I went to the fiscal side. I talked about foreign policy, the AFCFTA framework, the nexus between security, foreign policy, and the economy. And I talked very importantly, I expanded on the need to devolve powers, the need to amend the legislative acts, change the principles of derivation from 5 to 2, from IGR, equity of state, landmass, population, and derivation to only 2, IGR and derivation. And that is captured. That is captured in the suit, for example, that River State government, Lagos State, and Oyo State joined in against the federal government, Federal Inland Revenue Service, where they got a judgment in Port Harcourt. They are currently at the appeals court on that the states should collect their VATs and PIT. And why, if you look at that legislative list, you will see that a major problem that Nigeria has comes from the fact that the states are not allowed given control of their resources. I talked about the importance of, for example, in order to prevent abuse by state governors from giving them more power, ensure that, number one, the state judiciaries, they are financially independent, they are granted financial autonomy, and how it's going to provide checks and balance, ensure that governors do not control the judiciary. The office of the Attorney General of the state separate from the office of Commissioner of Justice. The state House of Assemblies also have financial autonomy so that the governors will not have control over that, so that there's accountability. Okay. And if you notice very well, for example, I'll give you an example. Osun State, and this is an example I always give. Osun State has a total debt stock of 407 billion naira. Osun has 2.5 million ounces of gold. How can a state with 2.5 million ounces of gold have a budget, a debt of 407 billion naira that pays 1.8 billion naira in interest? It doesn't make sense. It's an anomaly. On a monthly basis, that money is deducted from FAC through irrevocable payment, standing payment orders, ISPO. So if you give states control of their resources, you have a model where they prospect, they produce, they refine, they process, they pay royalties to the federal government. It will enable the state to depend less on handouts like the over 500 billion CBN gave to states for which you don't have any legal structure to justify the debts. It will reduce how they structure their budget. It will reduce the current feeding bottle style where towards the end of the month, the governor sends his Accountant General and Commissioner of Finance to Abuja to sit down with FAC to discuss how monies are going to be disbursed to the states. It's like you having a 28-year-old child who you've trained all his life, and 28, he's a graduate, he's out of school, he's done NYSC, maybe he even has a master's, and he's still living in your house as a father, depending on you giving pocket money on a monthly basis. That's exactly what you have. So these are the areas the book talks about, and I'm hopeful that someone will see this and gets a fresh perspective on how the economy of Nigeria can be engineered, and set on a path of growth.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I mean, once that book is out, we would love to have you come back and let's just take it chapter by chapter. There are lots of good topics that come up when we talk about the economy. Economy is not that boring, guys. You see, we want to make economy quote unquote sexy and important for you. We want to make you understand how this, because if you don't, it's not, you have to understand how your money works. That's the whole idea. So, Kevin, you've been with us for 3 I told you just 1 hour. I just appreciate that you're able to come in and just spend your valuable time with us. All the listeners on this space are very, very thankful to you that you've just had time to spend with us and to educate and and I know many, many others folks have as well. So let me just say thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So, guys,
Thank you, Carl.
thank you, guys. So this month, January is when I upload you guys lots of information. Next week, we're an MD of a stockbroking firm. We're going to ask him where should we invest our money in 2023. After him, I'm going to bring another MD of an investment firm. I'm going to where should we invest our money. So we're going to 2 weeks. Kevin has given you guys the macro picture, inflation, unemployment. Let him quote a lot of data. We're going to bring in the guys that manage money every day. We're going to ask them where you guys investing. We can hear them. I mean, they're not going to recommend to you, but at least you're going to pick up one or two things from just hearing them talk about where they invest. So please do hop in. On February, we're going to hop over to having this Sundays as well as Saturdays, just to give you guys a heads up there. But of course, we'll start noticing well before we change. But I think we're going to be on that Sunday, February. So February the 5th now. Going to be all right, guys. Thank you so much. Let me let Kevin go. You guys go enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you are in the fuel queues, my heart goes out to you. I've been posting a lot of jokes. That's just how I deal with depression. When I'm depressed, I use satire because I cannot understand how Nigeria will have fuel scarcity in 2023. We've passed PIB, we have budget. Still, we're on the road. So that's just my way of dealing with the failure of the government to govern. But I feel you guys. I pray for you guys. I do not know how you are surviving in that country. I don't know how. I just wish you guys the very best. All right, guys, take good care of yourselves. I'll see you guys later, and bye.